The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair chair, office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at thomsbeats.com, thomsbeets.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Thom, Thom. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Seize the Time, the story of the Black Panther Party and Huey P. Newton by Bobby Seale. This is from page 85, a subchapter titled Huey Backs the Pigs Down. And there are a few words in here that I'll be filling in, as it were. They're walking, he says, one day as we were walking out of the office, I guess we'd been there about a month or so, a pig passed by. He saw us coming out of the office with shotguns and pistols on our sides. About 6 or 7 of us came out of the office there in the daytime, and we looked at the pig as he passed by, and he jumped on his radio because he saw us coming out of the office with these pieces and stuff. We had just finished field stripping weapons, learning about 00 buckshot, learning about the 9mm and the .45, and having a political education session. We had a .45 and a .357 Magnum in the group and a couple of M1s. We had 3 or 4 shotguns by then. We bought up guns like a son of a bitch then. The pig went down 2 blocks and turned around, came back up the other side of the street. They were building rapid transit, BART, right down from Grove Street there, and we went up the other side of the boulevard and came back. We readily assessed that the pigs were ready to see what the F was happening, that this pig had radioed in, and he was running it down, how he had, quote, seen some N-words come out of a place here with some guns and blop, blop, de bloop, etc., come out of this office with guns and stuff. He was radioing into other pigs to help get him. Huey had his father's car that day, and he goes through that whole thing. So anyhow, the police pull him over, and Huey got in the car, and the pig came up to the window. You have any driver's license? So Huey rolled the window down. That wasn't more than a 3 or 4 inch crack in the window. Huey handed his license out the window. Is this your true name, the pig said? And Huey said, yes, that's my true name, Huey P. Newton. Is this your true address, 841 47th Street? And Huey said, yep, that's my true address, 841 47th Street. And what are you doing with the guns? And Huey said, what are you doing with your gun? this particular pig decided he wasn't going to argue, so he went back and got his little writing pad there where they fill out S-word. Your true name is Huey P. Newton? Huey said, that's right. The pig wrote it down. Your true address is 841 47th Street? Huey said, that's right. The pig then looked at his license. What's your phone number? And Huey said, 5, and stopped and wouldn't say anything else. And the pig said, 5 what? And this is when all the S-word between the pig and the party and the pigs began. Huey said, the Fifth Amendment. You ever heard of it? Don't you know about the constitutional right of a person not to testify against himself? 5, I don't have to give you anything but my identification, name, and address, so therefore I don't even want to talk to you. You can leave my car and leave me alone. I don't even want to hear you. What do you mean, the pig said. And Huey said, just what I said. The constitutional right of any man is that he doesn't have to testify against himself. And Huey had a big M1 sitting to his right with his hand on it. I had this 9mm sitting beside me, and Huey had this M1 at his side. Huey was driving. 4 other brothers were in the back seat. One of them was Bobby Hutton. They were being quiet because Huey told them to be quiet, and the pig is going crazy. He's by himself, and Huey's got all these black N-words in the car going for the MFer. Meanwhile, while the pig is trying to get bad, 3 cars drove up behind us and 1 in the front. Some more were in the driveway. Blop, blop, blop de blue. Then another car came in front of us. A pig jumped out of the car, walked up to our car, and said through the crack in the window with a hoggish voice trying to sound intimidating, what's going on here? And Huey said, the same basic procedures that are supposed to go on. Huey rolled the window down another 5 or 6 inches. The pigs were looking at the guns in the car. Can I see that pistol there? One of the pigs said. No, you can't see it, Huey told him. I was beginning to get skeptical about what was happening because he pointed to my 9mm pistol. Huey was on probation, and if they thought that this was Huey's pistol, I didn't know this law stuff the way Huey knew it, so I moved the pistol over beside me real close. It had been lying in the middle of the seat. I said, no, you can't see it. Huey said, no, you can't see the pistol, nor this, pointing to his rifle. And you don't want to look, and I don't want you to look at it. You don't have to look at it. Is that your pistol? He asked Huey. And I said, no, it's not his pistol, it's my pistol. I said that because I was thinking the man's going to jump on Huey because he already told me about the probation law. If he gets caught with a pistol, he's burned. But if he gets caught with a rifle, the man can't mess with him because his probation officer told him he can carry a rifle or shotgun and he couldn't stop him. The pig said, can I see it or not? So Huey said to me, I'll talk. And then he said to the pig, no, you can't see the pistol. Get away from the car. We don't want you around the car, and that's all there is to it. Well, I can ask him if I can see his pistol or not, the pig says. So I says, well, you can't see my pistol. The MFers tried to get indignant. They were blabbing and oinking to each other about who in the hell we thought we were, and Constitution my ass, they're just turning it around. Then the pig said to Huey, who the hell do you think you are? Look, damn it, Huey said. He opened the car door. This is where Huey got mad. I mean, you have to imagine this N-word. He got mad because these dogs were going to carry on and they were bracing up like they were bad. Huey didn't go for this at all. Huey got very mad. He opened up the door saying, who the hell do you think you are? In the first place, this man, pointing at the pig, came up here and asked me for my license like he was citing me for a ticket or observation of some kind. This police officer is supposed to be carrying out his duty, and here you come talking about our guns? Huey put his hand around his M1 rifle and continued, we have a constitutional right to carry the guns, and anyway, I don't want to hear it. The pigs backed up a couple of steps, and Huey was coming out of the car. Huey had his hand back in the car getting his M1, and you know, if you've ever seen Huey, he gets growly but articulate. He came out of the car with his M1. Huey knows this law so well that he wouldn't have had the one M1 loaded inside the car. So he came out of the car, he dropped around into the chamber right away. Clack, clop. Who do you think you all are anyway? Huey said to the pigs. And the pigs were all on the sidewalk harassing all the brothers and sisters who gathered around. You move on down the street, said the pig. Huey started interrupting. You don't have to move down the street. Don't go anywhere. These pigs can't keep you from observing. You have a right to observe an officer carrying out his duty. And these pigs, they listen to all this S-word, and it goes on from there. It's a great story. Seize the Time by Bobby Seale.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you, live. I'm back, and so glad to be back. President Putin and President Trump just finished their press conference. It is, you know, up until last week, up until the indictment that Robert Mueller pulled forward, I had been saying, pointing out, whatever, that there's, you know, obvious and considerable proof. I mean, you know, it's from Facebook itself, for example, that this private company in Russia, the Internet Research Bureau that Mr. Putin was referring to in the press conference, I think by a different name, Concord, was, flooding Facebook and Twitter and whatnot with all these, anti-Hillary Clinton, pro-Donald Trump ads and things designed to tear Americans apart and all that sort of thing. And I was saying, maybe Russia did that. Maybe, some billionaire in the United States did that. Maybe the Republican Party did that. I want to see the evidence. I want to see the evidence. Well, I've seen the evidence, or at least I've seen the charges, which contain a startling amount of detail. And both houses of Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives, have seen the evidence, and they've all come to the conclusion that the Russian government was messing with our elections. And, so the Russian side will say, well, yeah, you've tried to influence our elections, and you've tried to influence elections in our sphere of interest in Ukraine, et cetera. But that's, that is no excuse. So, number one, it is now clear to me, and I'm no longer, I no longer have any doubt that were it not for a couple of basically two things, although there's a whole bunch of them, but basically two things. Number one, for the Russian meddling in the election, number one. And number two, a small group of very, very powerful and wealthy billionaires who were given the power to manipulate elections by our U.S. Supreme Court. That had those two things not coincided, that Donald Trump would not be president. And he knows that as well. And either one of those things might be what tipped it over the top, but in the context of this, our Supreme Court has said it's perfectly legal for billionaires to own politicians. It's perfectly legal for Robert Mercer to have done what he did with the Trump campaign, although we'll see, It's perfectly legal for the Koch brothers to throw $1 million into dark money ads to get Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court because he's going to help out their business interests and these kind of things. But it's not legal under any circumstances in any way for a foreign government to come into the United States and mess in our elections. It's just simply not. And Donald Trump was asked the question, do you believe your own intelligence service? And he essentially said, he essentially said, I'm not going to believe my lying eyes. I'm going to believe what Putin said to me. And I think this has now moved, this press conference this morning, in my opinion, moved Donald Trump from the area of essentially bad actor to high crimes and misdemeanors worthy of impeachment. In fact, beyond high crimes and misdemeanors, and arguably treason. In as much as we were attacked, and prior to having actually read this indictment last Friday, I would have said, if the evidence shows, then I'm going to say, well, I'm saying it now. You read this indictment, and what was Putin's response? Oh, well, we'll let the FBI come over and watch as we interrogate our guys. Our guys. But in exchange for that, and, that but was a big one, right? In exchange for that, we want our intelligence services to go over to your country and interrogate some of your people. Right, like that's going to happen. This thing was this was a train wreck. This was, and here you have the president of the United States trashing the entire Democratic Party. He said he stood on foreign soil next to Putin, the president of Russia, and said that the Democratic Party was only interested in obstruction. Attacked a political party. Presidents of democracies, leaders of democracies don't even think like that, much less do that. That's what autocrats do. I was watching when he was at the NATO meeting a couple of days ago. And who's he walking down the street with and having a friendly chat with? Erdogan of Turkey, a guy who has turned into a full-blown autocrat, although he's still part of NATO. He's very strategically located. We've got this real problem now with Turkey. Jailing journalists, imprisoning political opponents. And Trump is walking and talking with this guy. By the way, Turkey is the place where, in Ankara, Turkey, I believe it is, there is a Trump hotel or a Trump property. Trump has business interests in Turkey. Trump wants to have business interests in Russia. One of the things that we know from Mueller's investigation of Michael Cohen is that right up until a few months before either the primary election or the general election, and I'm sorry, I don't remember which it was, but just right up until a few months before one of those two elections where Donald Trump won, Michael Cohen, on Trump's behalf, was still trying to negotiate a Trump hotel in Moscow. So here we have this just blows my mind. I mean, I don't know how to say it beyond that. It just blows my mind. This is, you know, we were attacked, according to these indictments, and I see no reason not to believe them. The data and the information and the detail is there. Mueller laid it out. And it was not rebutted this morning by Putin. And it certainly was not rebutted by Trump. We were attacked by a foreign power in a way that, in my opinion, altered the outcome of our election and made Donald Trump president. And of course, he's unwilling to acknowledge that, because that would mean that he would have to acknowledge that he is an illegitimate president, that Mike Pence is an illegitimate vice president, that Kavanaugh is an illegitimate nominee for the Supreme Court, that Neil Gorsuch, is an illegitimate member of the United States Supreme Court, that the actions that have been taken by Scott Pruitt to roll back environmental regulations so that more children in America will get cancer, but more oil billionaires will make more money, are illegitimate actions, that the actions that have been taken by Mick Mulvaney over at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the Office of Management and Budget, but particularly the CFPB, to basically neuter them so they can no longer protect American citizens from the predations of giant banks, are illegitimate. Because this administration is illegitimate. It was not legitimately elected. That Ryan Zinke's selling off, you know, bear's ears and cutting out our national parks and giving them away to campaign finance buddies of the Republican Party. And by the way, not only, in my opinion, is it clear that Donald Trump is a traitor, that he, in this press conference, committed an act of treason, attacking a political party as you're standing next to a foreign adversary. And yes, I'm all in favor of our having reasonable relations with Russia. We have reasonable relations with countries all over the world whose types of government we disagree with. We have a reasonable relationship with Saudi Arabia, arguably the largest exporter of terrorism on the planet. Now, I think that relationship should change, but that's a whole other topic. But yeah, of course, you want to have a reasonable relationship. But when somebody comes in and screws with your election and puts their guy in office, and then their guy comes over and says, hey, everything's cool, I have a problem with that. And I think this goes even beyond high crimes and misdemeanors. I mean, they indicted, the Republicans went after Bill Clinton for getting a BJ. They went after Bill Clinton for having what Bill Clinton didn't even consider real sex in the White House. And they called that a high crime or misdemeanor worthy of the end of the Republic. Oh, he's tearing down the Republic. Where are the Republicans now? They are complicit. We'll be back with your calls after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's come about 16 minutes past the hour. I'd like to get your thoughts on all this, too. We all probably watched the same press conference. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Wow. Johnny in Lamarck, Texas. Hey, Johnny, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Hey, Tom. You look good when you're tanned, and I heard your speech on KPFT this morning from last week. Really good, inspiring.
Oh, great. Thank you. What's up?
Listen, I have to agree and disagree with what you're saying in regards to the Mueller indictment of those half a dozen or so Russians, or however many they are.
That was a full dozen.
again?
It was 12. Now we have 25 Russians who've been indicted, and Russia's refusing to extradite any of them.
Oh, of course, Baker's doesn't. Okay. Well, here it is. The chicken's coming home to roost. And again, I can't disagree with that. It's not a reason to say, well, you did it so we can do it. But that's a reality. It's human nature. So I propose this. From this point forward, we make an announcement, official policy, although I doubt the Republicans will do it, is that you don't do this anymore, and we won't do these kind of things too.
I don't think you could do that, Johnny. You can't just say we won't. What you have to do is put into place actual laws and an actual enforcement mechanism, and it has to have actual teeth.
Didn't I just say that?
No, you said we have to say we won't do this, and you won't do this, and that's a different thing than passing a law. Or
I also said the word policy, and I also said the Republicans in power won't do it.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes, okay, forgive me. I think also that this is something that should be brought forward before the United Nations.
Absolutely.
So, okay, Johnny, thank you. Good to hear from you. Gary in Missouri. Hey, Gary, what's up?
I was just listening to you, and you said this blows your mind. My mind was blown back when he said he would date his own daughter if she wasn't his daughter.
Yeah, that was Trump on Howard Stern. I'm not defending that at all, but that is not something that you impeach a president for. It's something you don't elect him in the first place, and I agree. Anybody who knew that, and that was one of a long string of, grab him by the crotch and all this other stuff. I get that. And the Republicans were all, basically these guys were willing to make a deal with the devil. They were willing to say, if you're going to make abortion illegal, if you're going to make, guns freely available all over the country, if you're going to do away with environmental regulations, if you're going to basically cater to the wants and needs of the billionaire class and screw the American consumer, then we don't care what your sex life is like. We don't care what your marriages are like. We don't care how many women you've groped. We're going to put you in office. That's basically what the Republicans did.
And it's just since then that they've just catered to it.
Yeah.
And
but see, that is not even close to the same level as
treason.
As treason. Yeah, as standing on a podium and saying into a camera to a foreign power, Russia, if you're listening, please hack Hillary Clinton, essentially. And that same day, Russia did it. At least according to the Mueller indictment. And, apparently there's going to be a lot of ambiguity, probably throughout Trump's presidency. Until or unless this is figured out. And I'm also wondering what other shoes are going to drop on the side of the Mueller investigation. Where is he going to go with this? But this was just remarkable. Gary, thanks a lot for the call. It's good to hear from you. We'll be right back. Stick around. It's 20 minutes past the hour. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by XChair, the XChair chair, office chair. XChairTom.com is the website, XChairTHOM.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by SuperBeets. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, THOM.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. John Brennan, the former director of the Central Intelligence Agency, was tweeting about this morning. thought I had printed it out, but I don't have the printout. Let me see if I can scroll down through this, because this was a real, this was just a real, yeah. Anyhow, basically what Brennan said was that this is it, right? This is the former head of the CIA. This is it. This guy has stepped into the high crimes and misdemeanors territory, and that is. I just have to share. I'm sorry. It's going to take me just a second here. I've got to share. Here we go. Whoops. Somebody just tweeted it for me. Thank you. He said, oh, no, I lost it. Hang on. Here we go. 1 second. John Brennan, the head of the former director of the CIA, says, oh, rats. I'm gonna take your call while I'm looking for this thing. I'm sorry. Mike in Los Angeles. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hey, Tom. You know, there was a lot of speculation about why the secrecy with their initial meeting and why only the Russian interpreter present and no close aides and all that.
Right.
And I think it's pretty clear that it's because Trump's been on the job for nearly 18 months, and he was getting his first performance evaluation from his boss, and those things are always confidential.
You know, I'm assuming you're saying that tongue-in-cheek, but it
No.
is.
I'm literal.
Okay, you're being literal. I wouldn't go that far. I don't, and this is, I cut off a caller last Friday or Thursday, who came on and said, okay, if Trump is trying to destroy the United States, if he's a traitor or whatever, I don't believe that Donald Trump is or wants to be an agent of a foreign power. I think he wants to have a hotel in Moscow. I think he wants his sons and his daughters to be rich. I think he wants to be seen as the world's biggest billionaire. I think he wants to be bigger than Carlos Slim, bigger than the Koch brothers. I mean, that in my mind. And so, if a foreign power reaches out and says they'll help, Trump, I think, will say, and has said, in fact, yeah, sure, thanks a lot, I'll take the help. But Mike, I'm not willing to see one of the core assumptions that I think we always all have to make is that pretty much all behavior is motivated by a desire for a positive outcome. Now, it may be a positive outcome to one person's benefit and another person's detriment. But I don't think that Donald Trump is trying to destroy the United States. I think he's trying to change the United States in a way that may not be recognizable to many of us, that he wants to turn it into an autocracy, that he admires Putin, he admires Xi of China, he admires Duterte of the Philippines, he admires Erdogan of Turkey, and he is trying to remake the United States in that image. And the Republicans are going along with that. There is no law against that. We have had lawless presidents. I mean, Andrew Jackson, Donald Trump's hero, twice the Supreme Court said, you may not shut down the Second Bank of the United States. And he did. You may not do the Trail of Tears and export and death march the Cherokee from Georgia to Oklahoma. You may not do that. And the president, Andrew Jackson, said, screw you, Supreme Court, I'm going to do it anyway. We have had lawless presidents before. And, and our country has behaved in ways in the past that have been extraordinarily inappropriate. I mean, in the context of what we claim are our ideals. Slavery is a great example, right? And actually, Reconstruction, or the end of Reconstruction, the whole era after Reconstruction. But anyhow, I've said, here's John Brennan's tweet. And thank you, Sean. Donald Trump's press conference performance in Helsinki, this is the former head of the CIA, rises to and exceeds the threshold of high crimes and misdemeanors. It was nothing short of treasonous. Not only were Trump's comments imbecilic, he is wholly in the pocket of Putin. Republican patriots, where are you? To which I say, amen. Donald in Aurora, Illinois. Hey, Donald, thanks for listening to Chicago's Progressive Talk. We just have a minute, a little less than, in fact. A quick one?
Yes. Hi, Tom. I agree with you 100% about Donald Trump. He's in it for his own enrichment. He also was able to get China to get a license for his daughter so she could sell her product.
Right, which is worth a couple $100 million. And he's still making his stuff in China, by the way, while he's complaining about Harley Davidson.
Yeah, but there is one thing that puzzles me. and correct me if I'm wrong, did he not give classified information after attending a meeting in the morning, a morning meeting about intelligence? He gave classified information to the Russians in that morning about Islamic intelligence.
You're talking today? Or are you talking about back when he was in the meeting with Kislyak?
Yeah.
Well, in the meeting with Kislyak, he laid out information about Israeli intelligence that he was not supposed to give them. And, you know, that, I mean, for God's sake, if Obama had done that, he would have been impeached in an instant. Thanks for the call, Donald.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
John Brennan, nothing short of treasonous. We'll be back with your calls. For the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading Locked Down, Locked Out, Why Prison Doesn't Work and How We Can Do Better by Maya Schenwar, who is, or was, I believe she still is, the publisher, or the editor, rather, over at truthout.org. This is from the introduction, the very beginning of the book. She uses a word I can't say on the air. I'll replace it with the word damn. Damn, 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 damn. I'm crying with my mother over the phone. It's late evening, December 25th, 2012, and Kayla, my only sister and best friend, has been arrested for the 7th time in the past 6 years. She's in jail again, and this time we're sort of hoping she'll stay there. If she asks, I tell Mom, I'm not bailing her out. Well, you know, we're not, Mom says, her voice low and far away, a weary echo of words uttered in months and years past. If she's in there, at least she'll be safe. Jail, we agree, may be the only place that can save Kayla's life, staving off her burning dependency on heroin. Neither of us acknowledges that regardless of whether Kayla stays clean while incarcerated, sooner or later she'll be getting out. Do we know what she's in for, I asked Mom. Does it matter? I think of Kayla cuffed and listless, being dragged through the doors of the Cook County Jail, catching the eyes of women she's known before in court, on the street, in juvenile detention, in jail, in prison. I wonder whether a part of her is relieved to be back. Later, when I pick up the phone and hear a robotic voice announce, you have a collect call from the Cook County Jail, press 5 to take the call, I press the hang-up button and get into bed. My attitude toward Kayla's incarceration was born out of desperation. She'd overdosed 3 times within 2 months, passing out on the street, awakening in abandoned buildings or crowded hospitals, her pulse barely ticking. Yet my wish chafed against not only my love for her, but also my politics, my ideals, my sense of justice and truth. After all, I run a social justice-based news organization and have denounced the colossus that is the prison industrial complex for as long as I can remember. For nearly a decade, I've corresponded with a number of people in prison as both interviewees and pen pals, and I've learned much from them about the violence and hopelessness of our system. My understandings of the power structures that create prisons have been guided by the work of people like activist and scholar Angela Davis, a staunch prison abolitionist. How could I reconcile my wholehearted opposition to the prison industrial complex with a desire to see my own sister locked up? When I look back on that time, I can only comprehend it by acknowledging the insidious, persistent role that prison occupied in my mind. It was closely connected to the role it occupies in larger society. Incarceration serves as the default answer to many of the worst social problems plaguing this country. Not because it solves them, but because it buries them. By isolating and disappearing millions of Americans, more than 2.3 million right now, making us the most incarcerated country on the planet, prison conveniently disappears deeply rooted issues that society, or rather those with power in society, would rather not attend to. Prison, writes Angela Davis, performs a feat of magic. As massive numbers of homeless, hungry, unemployed, drug-addicted, illiterate, and mentally ill people vanish behind its walls, the social problems of extreme poverty, homelessness, hunger, unemployment, drug addiction, illiteracy, and mental illness become more ignorable, too. But, as Davis notes, prisons do not disappear problems, they disappear human beings. And the caging and erasure of those human beings, mostly people of color and poor people, perpetuates a cycle in which large groups of people are cut off from mainstream society and denied the freedoms, opportunities, civil dignity, and basic needs that allow them a good life. In many jails and prisons, incarcerated people are tossed into a dank, dungeon-like solitary confinement cell when they are determined to have misbehaved. It's dubbed the hole. Isolated and dark, it shuts out almost all communication with fellow prisoners in the outside. Guards control the terms of confinement and the channels, if any, by which words can travel in and out. The hole presents a stark symbol of the institution of prison in its entirety, which functions on the tenets of disappearance, isolationism, and disposability. The solution to our social problems, the mechanism that's supposed to keep things together, amounts to destruction, the disposal of vast numbers of human beings, the breaking down of families, and the shattering of communities. Prison is tearing society apart. This country's most marginalized communities bear the overwhelming brunt of that devastation, but ultimately we are all caught up in the destruction as the politics of isolation ruptures the human bonds that could otherwise hold together a safer, healthier, and more just society. The behemoth that encompasses the prison is called by many names. The most meaningful ones, I think, are those that convey the pervasiveness of its power, the way it infects the world outside as well as the people within. Scholar and activist Beth Ritchie uses the term prison nation, describing it as, quote, a broad notion of using the arm of the law to control people, especially people who are disadvantaged and come from disadvantaged communities, end quote. That control can take the form of prisons, jails, surveillance, policing, detention, probation, harsh restrictions on child guardianship, the militarization of schools, and other strategies of isolation and disposal, particularly deployed against poor communities of color, especially black communities. Others have used prison nation simply to demonstrate the system's vastness, how it infiltrates our culture and fuels our national politics, often in invisible ways. Prison industrial complex, PIC, is another key term. Rachel Herzing of the prison abolitionist group Critical Resistance defines it, and then she goes on through this. It's an extraordinary book, Locked Down, Locked Out by Maya Shin.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, getting your thoughts on my thoughts on this. I mean, I'm saying, in fact, I want to take it a step beyond what I said earlier. Not only do I think that there are now, and this press conference is a big piece of it, but, you know, the indictments that came out last week, the previous actions, Trump revealing classified methods and sources to Ambassador Kislyak in the White House way back months ago, a year ago, I think it was, you know, when he said, hey, I fired that Comey guy, he, you know, the pressure's off now. What? Right? Like I said, had Obama done that? Can you imagine? I mean, the nation would be in flames. The Republicans would be lighting up the street. They would. But not only, here's the problem. Not only is this entire administration illegitimate, but I don't know that we have a mechanism to deal with it. I know of no constitutional mechanism. There's nothing in the Constitution about a do-over. Mike Pence was right at the center of this. He was in charge of the whole transition team, which was riddled with people who are now have pled guilty to participating in corrupting the election on behalf of the Russians. I mean, it is, or on behalf of Trump, with the Russians on behalf, you understand what I'm saying. And I frankly don't have a solution. I mean, obviously impeachment, and I think Mike Pence should be named in the articles of impeachment for his participation and his collusion and his unwillingness to step up and be a patriot. I mean, this is just breathtaking. Anyhow, let's pick up your calls. Brian in Fort Collins, Colorado. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I have sort of a two-part thing for you. The first part is that, you know, the indictment of the 12 Russians is one part, and I heard Lawrence O'Donnell and others compare this. They said it's like Watergate Part 2.
Oh, it's much worse than Watergate. Watergate was just, you know, Richard Nixon thought that they had information on his, you know, having gotten a bribe, which he had gotten, and he thought that the Democrats had it. and he was trying to break into the DNC to get that information so he could so he could prevent it from being used against him in the election. This is not some little domestic thing. Back to you. I'm sorry, I interrupted you, Brian.
Yeah, no, but that's my point exactly, Tom. So we need to call this Pearl Harbor Part 2 or 9/11 Part 2.
Yes.
Because this is a foreign power attacking our most basic of institutions. If they launched a rocket and destroyed one of our buildings, we'd be like completely of a different mindset. So that's part one. And the indictments that are coming, and I appreciate your insight into what motivates Donald Trump, but I think it's more than that. I mean, he thinks that he is going to be able to out-negotiate, outmaneuver Putin, but at the same time, Putin is outmaneuvering him, and I think that his ties to Russian oligarchs and Putin run so deep and are of such long standing that that is a major part of what's motivating him.
3 or 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, Brian, his son Eric, in an interview, on the record interview, said we no longer need, and this was after Trump's last bankruptcy, or he was referring to the period after Trump's last bankruptcy, which I think was about 12 years ago, said words to the effect of, we no longer need money from American banks, we're getting our money out of Russia. And he was talking about Russian oligarchs, these Russian billionaires who are looking to launder their ill-gotten gains. And by the way, and Brian, I'm going to drop you here because I want to go off on this a little bit. Thank you for the call. I really appreciate the setup. Trump, you have to understand this guy's worldview for all this to make sense. Right? Why would he want America to look more like Russia or more like Turkey or more like the Philippines? Why would he want that? Why would he want to be the strongman leader of a country that's led by a strongman government? Because he is of the opinion, being a businessman, that the way businesses are run is how countries should be run. Remember when George W. Bush and Dick Cheney ran for president as the first pair of CEOs ever to become president and vice president in 2000, in the 2000 election? That was their sales pitch. We're going to run the country like a business. Countries are not businesses. The purpose of a business is to make a profit. The purpose of a company, of a country, is to do what's best for its people. Those are completely different things. But Trump doesn't understand that. He doesn't understand the law. He's never been trained in the law. He doesn't understand the Constitution. He's never been trained in the Constitution. He doesn't understand the history of the United States. All he knows is that for 40 or 50 years, or however long it was since his father grub-staked him for his business, and then he inherited a couple $100 million. All he knows is that he was in charge. And that's how business is run. The president of the business or the CEO of the business says jump, and in the kind of business Donald Trump ran, the people around him say how high. And that's a business with no unions and not the kind of company where you have any kind of a relationship between the people who own the company and the people who are working in the company. And so Trump has this worldview, which I believe is shared by the billionaires who are supporting him, that the way you run a business is how you should run a government. And that's why these guys, whether it's the Kochs or the Mercers or Trump or whatever, the whole bunch of them, Adelson, fill in the blanks, right? That's why these guys are pouring millions of dollars into our election to elect essentially autocratic Republican candidates, because they believe that a country, and they believe this, I think some of them believe it's the best thing for America. This was the argument, arguably, that Russell Kirk made in his 1951 book, A Conservative Mind, which got Barry Goldwater and William F. Buckley going. They believe that a government which has little conflict and rules because it knows best is the best way to have a government. So Trump, looks at these countries and says, hey, there's no conflict. There's nobody in the streets. Remember when he was in Saudi Arabia and Wilbur Ross was with him? Wilbur Ross, the billionaire Secretary of Commerce. He said he was worth $5 billion. That's what he told Fortune magazine. Turns out he's not even worth $1 billion. He's about $900 million. But that's still a hell of a lot of money. And Wilbur Ross revealing his massive ignorance, said to somebody in the press, "This was spectacular. There wasn't a single protester in the streets of Saudi Arabia." Well, of course there wasn't. If you protest, you get your head chopped off. Literally. Every Friday afternoon, they have executions where they behead people, cut their hands off. But these guys think this is the way to run a country. And they're putting people in the Supreme Court who agree with them. They are installing, and I'm talking about the billionaires who are funding the Republican Party. They are installing members in the House and the Senate, and in state houses and state senates, and in governorships who believe that this is the best way to run a government. And, you know, frankly, I respectfully disagree. I don't think it's the best way to run it. I don't think you can run a government like a country, like a company. And but you know, Trump is looking at this as a transactional thing. He's looking at this. He doesn't understand democracy, and he doesn't trust democracy. Stephen in Phoenix. Hey, Stephen, what's on your mind?
Morning, Tom. You know, the day after the 2000 elections, our friend, who's a paralegal, she emailed me, and she said the UPS driver in the morning here just came in, and he was crying. And I think about that at least once a month now. And I'm stupefied how far, as a country, where we have descended into. It's something I thought I'd never see. The FBI, the NSA, they've never been so disrespected by our president. And their former leaders, they just seem so incredulous about this Trump situation, what is going on. The entire Republican Party, you know, they are entirely complicit with allowing this insanity to continue. And this is basically high treason in the Senate and the Congress, who have been elected in 2016, really is illegitimate. And I'd like to know when something is going to be done about this situation. This is basically, it's terrorism on our people, and I am.
Yeah. The only mechanism that I know to correct this, Stephen, is the elections that are coming up in November. And November is not that far away. It's just a few months from now. And we're going to have an opportunity as a country to do a major reset. The problem that we have, and this is another one of the lies that Donald Trump told from the podium this morning. He said, you know, the Electoral College is heavily weighted in favor of the Democrats, which is not true. Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes than Donald Trump. Donald Trump won the Electoral College because the Electoral College reflects, you know, you get 2 electors for each of your 2 state senators, and you've got states with little teeny tiny populations who have 2 senators, and you got California with 2 senators, and the Electoral College, you know, it's just, the Electoral College is like all, you know, it's the way to, so here we have a House of Representatives where the Republicans control the House of Representatives, and yet they represent just a little over 40-45% of the American public, whereas the Democrats are representing more than 50% of the American public, but they don't have power. And in the Senate, it's more like the Republican senators represent a little over 30% of the American public, and yet they control the United States Senate. And this was the deal that was made to preserve slavery and to keep the slave states and the northern states all together at the beginning of the Republic. And I understand all that, and we can do history lessons all day long, but it is not working for us. And it is the reason why a small group of billionaires who control just a few thousand, maybe, you know, nationwide, if you include, you know, all the state houses that now the Koch network is you know, doing, has, and all these state by state organizations, you know, in Michigan, the ones that Betsy DeVos has been funding, and these other groups. Why these guys have been successful? They're using our system against us, and so anyhow, enough said. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, you know, I think it's overstated that it was a 9/11 attack. I think what's going on here is that we have a very corrupt system. You know, Move to Amend, you know, points that out very beautifully. I know you've been very supportive of that. The system is corrupt. It's corrupt worldwide, and institutions that we once depended on are lying to us. We're not getting accurate information, and the people that are really left out of it are people like me, people like you, a lot of your listeners, a lot of the middle class, and in the end, it will be the upper classes, because we're, as Heidi Hautala
there is a qualitative difference, though, here, John, and respectfully, I disagree with you. And here's the qualitative difference. If I may,
I would like to say, can I finish?
No, I want to make this point. The qualitative difference is that if you and I agree that the corruption of our democracy by the Koch brothers or the Adelsons or whatever is a horrible thing, yet they are Americans, and even if they are doing what you and I think is harmful to our country, I believe that they believe that they're doing what's in the best interest of their country. They want to see a libertarian paradise. I don't think that Vladimir Putin's intentions, or the intentions of, frankly, any other leader of any other country in the world, is to do what's in the best interest of the United States based on their own belief system. And that qualitative difference means that what the Kochs are doing is corrupt. I agree with you. What Putin did, what the Russian government did, let's say specifically, is an attack. Back to you, John.
Yeah, I absolutely disagree with you. And why do you make yourself a useful tool for the corruption that you protest against? I mean,
I'm not going to let. Yeah, I'm sorry, John. I'm not a useful tool of anybody, and that's insulting. Linda in Santa Rosa, California. Hey, Linda, what's up?
Hi, Tom. So
Linda, I just noticed I missed my clock. I'm going to hit a break here in 8 seconds, which is not fair to you. Please let me put you on hold, and I'll bring you back in just a minute. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Linda. This is entirely my fault. I'm sorry. There it comes. It's one day back in the saddle, right? I took 3 days off last week, and I forgot to watch my damn clock. We will be back. Is this treason? Is it merely corruption? Is it, what is it? I think it's treason. I think we have been attacked. And and the only thing I can see to do it is to get out and vote.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And get everybody you know registered to vote, and make sure that they show up to vote, and do everything you can to support politicians who put America first, literally. I love shit. No, this. I'm still okay. Linda, I'm sorry I cut you off. It's Santa Rosa. Thank you for watching Free Speech TV. You're back on the air.
Okay, thanks. Tom, I agree with most of what you said. Yes, this is treason. The difference is that I don't think that it matters whether or not Donald Trump understands how democracy works. He doesn't care. All he cares about is himself and his power, and he will tear everything down with him. And
I agree.
The RNC was hacked. Those emails were never released, and those are being
You mean the
used
DNC?
as compromise.
Oh, wait a minute.
So
You're saying that the Russians hacked the RNC along with the DNC?
Yes, they did, and they never released those on WikiLeaks. Why? Because they're using them to blackmail.
How do you know that, Linda?
The senators. I feel it in my bones because you see Lindsey Graham. Sometimes he's making sense, and other times his nose is so far up Donald Trump's backside, it feels like his dog chain has been yanked, and has been reminded that there is some stuff that was found in the RNC that is embarrassing to him. And some of these other congressmen, it just seems really odd, their behavior. They are not patriots. They are compromised individuals, and they are not following their oaths of office. They have become tools of the Russian government, and they are supporting this treason. And they went to Moscow on the 4th of July, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
These people are treasonous.
This is the delegation. Yeah, for people who don't know what you're talking about, Linda, because it didn't get much coverage in the American press, bizarrely. You had 8 or 9 Republican senators, weren't they all senators, who went to Russia on the 4th of July?
Yeah, there were senators and congresspeople that went there.
Okay.
And so I hope that voting will work, but I still feel that in the state of Michigan, there were 75,000 ballots that weren't counted, and the margin of victory was 10,000. Right. I don't have confidence that the manipulation of the voter rolls by either the Republicans with trying to knock people off the voting polls with cross-check, or with Russians going in and manipulating and taking people off,
right.
Whether or not our elections will actually reflect the accurate intent of the voters.
Linda, I don't think our elections have reflected the intent of the voters. Well, in a big way, they haven't reflected the intent of the voters in hundreds of years because of the Electoral College. But in the more practical sense, in the context of electronic voting, I don't think that they've reflected the interests of the voters since 1998. And the 2000 election was a major turning point. But 98 was when we first started seeing redshift. And every year since 1998, the more heavily a state depends on electronic voting machines, particularly those without paper trails, the more heavily the exit polls disagree with the elections, and the more heavily Republicans win when the exit polls say Democrats should win. I agree with you on all that. To the best of my knowledge, the only solution, I mean, you get the Ted Nugent types who are like, well, the solution to all our problems is to go into the streets with our AR-14s or whatever. That's crazy. To the best of my knowledge, the only way we can do this is to massively, overwhelmingly show up at the polls. Even if we don't believe that it is always, that they are going to be consistently fair, we have to do this. I don't have an alternative, Linda. Linda, thanks so much for the call. We'll be back. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. XChairTom.com is the website, XChairTHOM.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, THOM.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So, what is this that we are experiencing right now? Is this a coup? Is this treason? Is this bad politics? As I said, I can't come up with anything other than, in order to resolve this problem, anything other than voting these guys out of office. And yes, I get it that, states like Georgia that use untraceable, voting machines, et cetera, and they have huge amounts of redshift. We're going to have to show up 10 points over in order to beat a 7-point disadvantage that I think our rigged election system and pushing people off the voting rolls and all that other stuff are creating. Charles in Opelika, Florida. Hey, Charles, what's up?
Hey, how you doing? Sorry, I'm sure John didn't mean it that way, because I do like the way that he does.
I like John a lot. I just, he pushed my button, but
okay,
life goes on.
But the thing is, I got 2 points, and I hope I can come clear as possible.
Sure.
I think all roads lead back to China. I think with Rick Gates standing up next to Rosenstein on Friday, it just proves it no matter what, that Trump had he had to know about what was going on, because this is Manafort's second, and that was his partner, right?
Manafort lived. No, I don't know if they did business together. Manafort lived in his in Trump Tower, and Manafort, for no salary at all, became head of the Republican, the Trump campaign, and and apparently Manafort participated in changing the Republican platform to say, it wasn't such a big deal what happened in Ukraine, Crimea, et cetera, to the best of my knowledge, as I recall.
But my point is, that was Rick Gates He was standing up there when Rosenstein was giving out the indictment. And to me, that's just a signal that, hey, the gig is up.
Oh, Rick Gates was Manafort's business partner. I understand. I'm sorry, Charles. I misunderstood you.
Right. He was standing right next to Rosenstein on the indictments on Friday.
It's Stein, by the way.
And the press is not, and the corporate press has not made anything about it. And that's the direct link from, from the Russians to Donald Trump himself, with Manafort being in the middle.
Yeah.
And second of all, it's not ironic to me that right now China is holding talks with the EU on trade.
Sure.
And they've
well, it's been going on for a while. This whole Belt Road thing, they're rebuilding the old Silk Road.
Right, and they've given Deutsche Bank, underwriting abilities and also interbank abilities.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Charles, and this is important stuff for us to be paying attention to. Thank you for the call. But I want to get back to this question of what the hell is going on here with the President of the United States dissing the FBI and the Democratic Party in front of Putin.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairtom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at thomsbeets.com, thomsbeets.com, or by calling 800-568-9889.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom.
Today on the Thom Hartmann Book Club with Thom Hartmann University, we're reading from what is apparently Donald Trump's second favorite book. His number one, according to his first wife, as I recall, was the collected speeches of Adolf Hitler, which was on his bed on his bedstand next to his bed for years. But when he was asked by reporters his favorite book, he said P.T. Barnum's The Art of Money Getting, or Golden Rules for Making Money. So I thought, hey, let's check this out. This is from the introduction. Those who really desire to attain an independence but have only to set their minds upon it and adopt the proper means, as they do in regard to any other object which they wish to accomplish, and the thing is easily done. But however easy it may be found to make money, I have no doubt many of my hearers will agree it is the most difficult thing in the world to keep it. The road to wealth is, as Dr. Ben Franklin truly says, as plain as the road to the mill. It consists simply in expending less than we earn. That seems to be a very simple problem. Mr. Micawber, one of those happy creations of the genial Dickens, puts the case in a strong light when he says that to have an income of £20 per annum and spend £20 and 6 pence is to be the most miserable of men, whereas to have an income of only £20 and spend but £19 and 6 pence is to be the happiest of mortals. Many of my readers may say, we understand this. This is economy, and we know economy is wealth. We know we can't eat our cake and keep it also. Yet I beg to say that perhaps more cases of failure arise from mistakes on this point than almost any other. The fact is, many people think they understand economy when they really do not. True economy is misapprehended, and people go through life without properly comprehending what that principle is. One person says, I have an income of so much, and here's my neighbor who has the same, yet every year he gets something ahead and I fall short. Why is it? I know all about economy. Well, he thinks he does, but he does not. There are many who think that economy consists in saving cheese parings and candle ends. Keep in mind, this was written in the late 1900s. In cutting off 2 pence from the laundress's bill and doing all sorts of little mean, dirty things. Economy is not meanness. The misfortune is also that this class of persons let their economy apply in only one direction. They fancy that they are so wonderfully economical in saving a half penny where they ought to spend 2 pence that they think they can afford to squander in other directions. A few years ago, before kerosene oil was discovered or thought of, one might stop overnight at almost any farmer's house in the agricultural districts to get a very good supper. But after supper, he might attempt to read in the sitting room and would find it impossible with insufficient light from just one candle. The hostess, seeing his dilemma, would say, it is rather difficult to read here in the evenings. The proverb said, you must have a ship at sea in order to be able to burn 2 candles at once. We never have an extra candle except on extra occasions. Those extra occasions occur perhaps twice a year. In this way, the good woman saves $5, $6, or $10 in that time, but the information which might be derived from having an extra candle would, of course, far outweigh a ton of candles. But the trouble does not end there. Feeling that she is so economical in tallow candles, she thinks she can afford to go frequently to the village and spend $20 or $30 for ribbons and furloughs, many of which are not necessary. This false economy may frequently be seen in men of business, and in those instances, it often runs to paper writing. You find good businessmen who save all the old envelopes and scraps and would not tear a new sheet of paper if they could avoid it for the world. This is all very well. They may in this way save $5 or $10 a year, but being so economical only in note paper, they think they can afford to waste time, to have expensive parties, and to drive their own carriages. This is an illustration of Dr. Franklin's, quote, saving at the spigot and wasting at the bunghole, or penny wise and pound foolish. Punch, and speaking of this one idea class of people, says they are like the man who bought a penny herring for his family's dinner and then hired a coach and 4 to take it home. I never knew a man who succeed by practicing this kind of economy. True economy consists in always making the income exceed the outgo. Wear the old clothes a little longer if necessary. Dispense with the new pair of gloves. Mend the old dress. Live on plainer food if need be. So that under all circumstances, unless some unforeseen accident occurs, there will be a margin in favor of the income. Penny here, $1 there, placed at interest, goes on accumulating, and in this way, the real desire is attained. It requires some training, perhaps, to accomplish this economy, but once used to it, you will find there is more satisfaction in rational saving than in irrational spending. Here's a recipe which I recommend. I have found it to work an excellent cure for extravagance and especially for mistaken economy. When you find that you have no surplus at the end of the year and yet have a good income, I advise you to take a few sheets of paper and form them into a book and mark down every item of expenditure. Posted every day or week in 2 columns, one headed necessities, the other comforts, and the other headed luxuries. And you will find that the latter column will be double, triple, and frequently 10 times greater than the former. The real comfort of life costs but a small portion of what most of us can earn. Dr. Franklin said, it is the eyes of others and not our own eyes which ruin us. If all the world were blind except myself, I should not care for fine clothes and furniture. It is the fear of what Mrs. Grundy may say that keeps the noses of most worthy families to the grindstone. In America, many persons like to repeat, we are all free and equal, but it is a great mistake in more senses than one. That we are born free and equal is a glorious truth in one sense, yet we are not all born equally rich, and we never shall be. So anyhow, the book is The Art of Money Getting, or Golden Rules for Making Money by P.T. Barnum. It's actually a pretty good book.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Victoria Jones, the chief Washington correspondent for the DC Radio Company. You can tweet her at Victoria Jones DC. And Victoria, welcome back to the program. It's been a while.
Great to talk to you, Tom.
Great speaking with you. Originally, back last week when we talked about getting you on the show, we were talking about, Trump's trip to the UK and Theresa May and all this other kind of stuff. And then I was out of town and, so here we are today talking. In what has happened in the meantime is the indictments of these Russian intelligence officers and, of course, the press conference this morning after the 2-hour, 10-minute private meeting with no other people in the room between Trump and Putin. And I'm curious as, one of the more informed people in the news media. I respect your opinion tremendously, and you are such an astute observer, and you have the benefit of understanding of a bicultural understanding of this stuff and bicontinental understanding of these things. Before we get to Trump and Theresa May and all that stuff, I'm curious your thoughts on what happened this morning.
Yeah, well, I was pretty shocked this morning. My mouth fell more and more open, and I eventually shut it because I got worried about flies falling in. But we must get to Theresa May, and more importantly, the Queen, because I'm
we will do that.
Shocked about that also. Well, it can be summed up rather well by going back to Prime Minister Tony Blair. Remember his spin doctor, who was very effective, Alistair Campbell, who got into quite a bit of trouble for his spinning. He tweeted this morning, "The last 10 minutes have been the highlight of Putin's KGB career."
Yeah, I think that's probably an accurate statement.
Yeah, that's from a spin doctor. Another tweet this morning from former CIA Director John Brennan. Donald Trump's press conference performance in Helsinki rises to and exceeds the threshold of high crimes and misdemeanors, Brennan said. It was nothing short of treasonous. Not only were Trump's comments imbecilic, he is wholly in the pocket of Putin. Republican patriots, where are you? Question mark, question mark, question mark.
Yeah. Well, and it was directly asked of President Putin, do you have compromising information on Trump? And he did not deny it. I've got the whole transcript right in front of me right here. And he says, there were over 500, I skipped through it, but he says, I didn't even know he was in Moscow. I treat him with the utmost respect, but back then he was a private individual. Nobody told me he was in Moscow. There were over 500 businessmen, high-ranking, high-level ones. I don't even remember the last names of each and every one of them. Look, do you think we tried to collect compromising information on each and every single one of them? Well, which is, by the way, an admission that they're collecting compromising information, I would think. And then he says, well, it's difficult to imagine an utter nonsense of a bigger scale than this. Please disregard these issues and don't think about this anymore. That's not a no.
Yeah, get this junk out of your head. Yeah, I mean, that he didn't deny it. And, Trump said, well, if he had it, don't you think he would have got out by now? Well, no, not if Putin didn't want it to get out, and if it was more valuable to him that it stayed in.
Right, that's the whole point of having it.
It exists.
You can't blackmail somebody if the information. I mean, the easiest way to short circuit somebody who's trying to blackmail you is to go public with the information. It's just that simple. Right. And so anyhow, okay. So thank you for your thoughts on that.
But I think what was really shocking to the press, and there's been some very interesting tweeting and reporting from reporters in the room, members of the White House press corps today, right, who apparently sat pretty stunned after the press conference, and very good questioning by the White House press corps, I thought, today.
Yeah, the
very
guy.
Good
yeah, the fellow from Reuters, and I forget who the other one was.
Yeah, tougher than usual, actually, very tough. Was that they were just stunned that President Trump really not only did not rise to the occasion, but almost appeared to be giving the Russia line and giving Putin's answers for him. And also, he didn't say what happened in the private meeting, but I thought this was very interesting. When asked about the Russian interference, not only did he go into an extraordinary rant about the Democrats, but he said one thing that was very interesting, which was that Putin was very interested, had an interesting idea. And I immediately thought, Well, this is what Putin does. He's a former KGB agent. He understands people. He knows their weaknesses and their vanities. He knows that Trump likes conspiracy theories, and so he's come up with one, possibly, and this is what he's told him during this meeting, and President Trump is interested in it, and it's an interesting idea, and they're off to the races. And, of course, Putin presenting Russia as an equal and suggesting that Mueller, he will have undermined Mueller throughout the meeting, agreeing with Trump about the witch hunt, now is suggesting that they have a joint investigation, which I suspect we may hear in days to come President Trump sympathizing with.
Yeah, that shocked me rather too. So he went to he started this thing out going to NATO, and then he went to the UK, if I'm remembering the sequence correctly. And in the UK, after dissing Theresa May, the Prime Minister, in the press, a story that leaked as he was having breakfast with her, as I recall, or lunch. And then he's walking in front of the Queen. I mean, how are the British reacting? What happened, and what do the British think of this?
Well, he didn't bow to the Queen, which was seen as a breach of protocol and rude. And then he walked in front of the Queen. And I think everybody's going, well, wasn't he briefed? And then they were also going, but why would you walk in front of a 92-year-old woman anyway?
Right.
I think that's what they were going, that this was just astonishingly rude, and she couldn't get round him. And then, of course, the story came out in the Sunday Times yesterday, which is a very reliable newspaper, even though it's also Murdoch-owned. But it's a serious paper. But Prince Charles and Prince William refused to meet with Trump.
Whoa, interesting.
Yeah.
So broadly, do you think that we saw 500,000 or 1 million people turn out? You could tell me, I don't remember the number, for the, protesting Trump's inauguration. And then, of course, the next day, I think it was well over 1 million people, the Women's March. And we had all these people out on the streets in the UK and in Scotland. Do they reflect the overwhelming sense of the British people, or merely the loud partisan, half, or a small percentage, or what?
There's a small percentage of people who like President Trump, but it's difficult to underestimate and to understate the dislike for President Trump and the astonishment with which the British say that why did Americans elect him? Because they have respect for Americans and they really like Americans. They genuinely don't understand, and they ask me this when I go over there or talk to them on the phone. We don't understand why you did this. Why did you do this?
Right.
Why? They don't get it.
Yeah, I was in Orlando last week, and there was a woman there from the UK. Actually, there are quite a few people there from the UK, but one woman in particular engaged me in conversation during one of the lunch breaks, and she was a wealthy, I'm assuming, from what I could see, a wealthy Brit, who said that it is now illegal in the UK to fly the Union Jack, to fly the flag of the United Kingdom, because it's racist. And I mean, it was this whole kind of screed about the nature and character of England is changing because of this merger with the European Union, and the European Union is bringing all these refugees in, and these refugees are now coming into the UK, and London doesn't look like London anymore, and blah, blah, blah. And it sounded to me like a fairly racist rant. But it's also the exact same kind of rant that you're hearing from Trump supporters when they talk about those people from south of the border. And I'm curious, what kind of purchase does that have? That's the Boris Johnson world, isn't it?
There is purchase for that. England doesn't look like England anymore. Well, no, it doesn't look like England in the 1910s, in 1913. No, it doesn't look like England in 1913, or the year before the First World War broke out. It doesn't look like that. No, it doesn't, and it never will again. And the majority of Britons love that. They love its sort of polyglot equality.
Right.
But there are some people who yearn for it like it once was. But, that's a time when women couldn't vote. So,
yeah. It's this bizarre notion that we're seeing on both sides of the Atlantic and frankly all over the world, that somehow the amount of pigment in your skin is going to determine your value system, and it seems to me so sad. It's just so wrong. Victoria Jones. Victoria, it's always great talking with you. Thank you for your insights and your thoughts.
Thank you very much.
And you can tweet Victoria at Victoria Jones DC. So, and Victoria, of course, she's the chief Washington correspondent for the DC radio company. We'll be back with more of the program and more of my thoughts on the spectacle we saw this morning right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls, and more of the news of the day right after this. And welcome back. Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, Norma, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Well, I wanted to talk about, yes, I think Trump did commit treason, but I think this is deeper than Trump, and I don't know how we're going to handle this, because I think that if you look at this nomination of Kavanaugh, did Kennedy's son actually work as Trump's banker in Deutsche Bank and funnel the Russian money to Trump?
Right, we don't know. The simple answer right now is we don't know.
Yes, we don't know. And also the fact that the FBI is hinting that they knew that this was going on in August and September of 2016, all this hacking and interfering with the election, and they did nothing. They did not stand up and say anything.
Yeah, Strzok did not. The guy that they were trashing in front of Congress, he could have ended the Trump campaign with one leak. And instead, Comey killed the Clinton campaign with a press conference.
Yes. And so also, if the FBI knew, how much of Congress knew also and said nothing? And then if you have this group of people, the Federalist Society, handing Trump a list and saying, you will pick your judge from this, did they also hand him a list saying, you will pick your cabinet from this? And how much corruption
we know that. I mean, the Heritage Foundation was and other groups were involved in advising Trump on cabinet picks. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that was right out.
So
that was right out in the open.
So how many of these oligarchs, these 1%ers, the rich people who have international businesses, also do business with Russia? And how many of them? They said that they were going after 7 companies in their indictments. So which 7 are they? And how much of an influence have they had in taking over our government?
Yeah.
And I think, yes, you're correct. This was a coup.
Yeah, that I suspect is a minor consideration, Norma. Consider that the entire GDP of Russia is less than the state of Texas. Russia is, and most of Russia's income is the consequence of selling fossil fuels. So I'm not, the business interest part of it. I think Trump, in fact, we know he was desperately trying to get a Trump hotel in Moscow, and probably is continuing to, and that's probably what he wanted to talk about to Putin. But
yes, I think that we really need to keep an eye on Congress for the next months to see how they handle this. What are they going to do? Are they going to just be complicit in this? Are they going to continue to commit what in my mind is also treason? And how are we going to handle it? Should the election have been stopped? Should we now have someone come in and be president while all these trials go on? And we have no laws to cover this.
We have no mechanism for it. The only mechanism, in my understanding, and I've not seen or heard anything that contradicts this, the only mechanism that could be used is the mechanism of impeachment, and you could go after, and particularly if there's a Democratic Speaker of the House who would become president if both the president and vice president were impeached, then you could essentially reverse the election by impeaching both Donald Trump and Mike Pence after the elections if the Democrats take the House and take 2/3 of the Senate. It's extremely unlikely, but it's not impossible. So that's all I know. Norma, thank you for the call. It's always nice to hear from you. I appreciate it. We'll be back. It's the Thom Hartmann Program here. Stick around. We'll be back with more of your calls. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair chair, office chair. xchairtom.com is the website, xchairtom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Been here with you. I want to make a point that I made in the first hour. I want to make it all over again in perhaps slightly different words, because I want to be so absolutely clear about this, what's going on here. And I'm not talking about what's going on here with, did Trump commit treason this morning? Yes, I believe he did. Has he operated contrary to American interests? Yes, he has. What's the solution for this? If enough Democrats show up and enough, frankly, people are defecting from the Republican Party in droves, and independents are going, obviously I'm not going to vote for a Republican. If enough people show up and vote in the next election and double check and make sure that Chris Kobach, Donald Trump, and Mike Pence have not removed, and their buddies have not removed your name from the voting rolls, because they have pulled millions of names off voting rolls over the last few years. Make sure that you're still registered to vote. And if you're in a state with all these ID requirements, 16 ways to Sunday, find out what those requirements are so that when you show up to vote, you can actually cast a real ballot, not a provisional ballot. But if that were to happen, and Democrats took control of the House and 2/3 of the Senate, and they brought articles of impeachment not against Donald Trump, but against Donald Trump and Mike Pence together, and convicted them in the Senate and removed them from office, then the Speaker of the House, who would be a Democrat, would become president, and you would have effectively reversed the 2016 election. That's the only mechanism I can think of to make it happen. So back to the rant I wanted to lay on you, my thoughts on this stuff. Brett McDonald tweets to me, he says, sorry, Tom, no, you're not a tool, but if you think for 1 minute the Koch brothers have the best interest of the American people, you're wrong. Koch brother policies are every bit as harmful to the people as Russia. This is what Brent said to me. And I understand what you're saying. And I think that the policies of the Kochs and some of these other billionaires, in my opinion, are extremely destructive to my country as I understand it, and its values as I understand them. But you have to understand, there is a difference between what billionaire businessmen and women, I suppose, Betsy DeVos is passing out money to these groups and supporting things, like the Mackinac Group and whatnot. There's a difference between American billionaires messing in our elections and foreign countries messing in our elections. And I think it's important for us to distinguish between the two. I think that we should have laws that prevent the undue influence of large money. This is basically what Franklin Roosevelt fought his entire presidency, and by the way, defeated. But you have to understand how these guys are thinking and where they're thinking. Back in 1951 or 52, Russell Kirk published this book called The Conservative Mind, and he laid out this argument. The book is still in print. You can buy it and read it. And it wasn't just him. I mean, there was a whole bunch of people who were writing for a lot of conservative publications that were making this argument, that if the middle class continued to grow as a result of widespread unionization, a time would come when the middle class was strong enough and politically active enough that they would start voting to take money away from rich people and give it to themselves, number one. In fact, this had already happened in the 1930s. It was called Social Security. And number two, and the WPA and the CCC and all those other, quote, socialist programs. So that would happen. And number two, you would see moral order break down in the United States and we would devolve into chaos. And sure enough, in the 1960s, when young people came out in the streets in hordes, by the millions, and said no to the Vietnam War, after the introduction of the birth control pill, the legalization of it in 1961, the sexual revolution, the women becoming politically active and active in corporate boardrooms. When these guys, these conservatives, saw this happening, they thought, oh my God, Russell Kirk was right. This is chaos. This is the end of America as we know it. And by the way, it was in some ways. And that's when they decided to fight back. That's a different thing than a foreign country messing in your elections.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It is, in my opinion, a terrible thing for billionaires to, basically be, funding the destruction of American values, but it's a different thing. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Elaine Pagel's book, The Gnostic Gospels. This is from chapter 3, God the Father, God the Mother. Unlike many of his contemporaries among the deities of the ancient Near East, the God of Israel shared his power with no female divinity, nor was he the divine husband or lover of any. He can scarcely be characterized in any but masculine epithets: king, lord, master, judge, and father. Indeed, the absence of feminine symbolism for God marks Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in striking contrast to the world's other religious traditions, whether in Egypt, Babylonia, Greece, and Rome, or in Africa, India, and North America, which abound in female symbolism. Jewish, Christian, and Islamic theologians today are quick to point out that God is not to be considered in sexual terms at all, yet the actual language they use daily in worship and prayer conveys a completely different message. Who, growing up Jewish or Christian tradition, has escaped the distinct impression that God is masculine? And while Catholics revere Mary as the mother of Jesus, they never identify her as divine in her own right. If she is the mother of God, she is not God the Mother, on an equal footing with God the Father. Christianity, of course, added the Trinitarian terms to the Jewish description of God, yet of the three divine persons, two, the Father and the Son, are described in masculine terms, and the third, the Spirit, suggests the sexlessness of the Greek neuter term for spirit, pneuma. Whoever investigates the early history of Christianity, the field called patristics, that is, study of the fathers of the church, will be prepared for the passage that concludes the Gospel of Thomas. Simon Peter said to the disciples, "Let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life." Jesus said, "I myself shall lead her in order to make her male, so that she too may become a living spirit resembling you males. For every woman will make herself male, who will make herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven." End of quote from the Gospel of Thomas. Strange as it sounds, this simply states what religious rhetoric assumes, that the men form the legitimate body of the community while women are allowed to participate only when they assimilate themselves to men. Other texts discovered at Nag Hammadi demonstrate one striking difference between these heretical sources and the orthodox ones. Gnostic sources continually use sexual symbolism to describe God. One might expect that these texts would show the influence of archaic pagan traditions of the mother goddess, but for the most part, their language is specifically Christian, unmistakably related to a Jewish heritage. Yet instead of describing a monastic and masculine God, many of these texts speak of God as a dyad who embraces both masculine and feminine elements. One group of Gnostic sources claims to have received a secret tradition from Jesus through James and through Mary Magdalene. Members of this group prayed to both the Divine Father and Mother, quote, from thee, Father, and through thee, Mother, the two immortal names, parents of the divine being, and thou, dweller in heaven, humanity, of the mighty name. The end of the quote from the prayer. Other texts indicate that the authors had wondered to whom a single masculine God proposed, quote, let us make man in our image after our likeness, in Genesis 1:26. Since the Genesis account goes on to say that humanity was created, quote, male and female, some concluded that the God in whose image we are made must also be both masculine and feminine, both father and mother. How do these texts characterize the Divine Mother? I find no simple answer since the texts themselves are extremely diverse. Yet we may sketch out three primary characterizations. In the first place, several Gnostic groups describe the Divine Mother as part of an original couple. Valentinius, the teacher and poet, begins with the premise that God is essentially indescribable. But he suggests that the divine can be imagined as a dyad, consisting in one part of the ineffable, the depth, the primal father, and in the other of grace, silence, the womb, and mother of all. Valentinius reasons that silence is the appropriate complement of the father, designating the former as feminine and latter as masculine because of the grammatical gender of the Greek words. He goes on to describe how silence receives, as in a womb, the seed of the ineffable source. From this she brings forth all the emanations of a divine being, ranged in harmonious pairs of masculine and feminine energies. Followers of Valentinius prayed to her for protection as the mother and as the mystical eternal silence. For example, Marcus, the magician, invokes her as grace, in Greek the feminine term charis. Quote, may she who is before all things, the incomprehensible and indescribable grace, fill you within and increase in you her own knowledge. End of quote from the Gospels. In his secret celebration of the Mass, Marcus teaches that the wine symbolizes her blood. As the cup of wine is offered, he prays that grace may flow into all who drink it. A prophet and visionary, Marcus calls himself the womb and recipient of silence, as she is of the Father. The visions he received of the divine being appeared, he reports, in female form. Another Gnostic writing, called the Great Announcement, quoted by Hippolytus in his Refutation of All Heresies, explains the origin of the universe as follows. Quote, from the power of silence appeared a great power, the mind of the universe, which manages all things, and is a male. The other, a great intelligence, is a female which produces all things. Following the gender of the Greek words for mind and intelligence, this author explains that these powers joined in union and are discovered to be in duality. The book, The Gnostic Gospels, by Elaine Pagels.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Rich in Greenwood, Indiana. Hey, Rich, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Thanks so much. You've just been doing an A-plus amazing show.
Thank you.
I wanted to bring people's attention back to the information disclosure that I know as the 22nd of March, 2017, when I heard on BBC The World a statement by Evan McMullen, who was a candidate in the 2016 election.
And a former CIA officer.
That's right. Better for America was his slogan. And he came in on the 8th of August. He said that it was well known in the Republican Party that there was something going on between the Trump campaign and the Russians. And he said that there was a conversation. And then, all of a sudden, it turned out that that conversation had a recording. And it was California Representative Kevin McCarthy, Republican, who said in a group meeting, Putin pays two people in our ranks. He gives money to Representative Dana Rohrabacher, and he's paying the Trump campaign. And then there's laughter, and he says, no, swear to God. And then Paul Ryan breaks in and says, okay, if this is true, then it does not leave this conversation. This is how we know we're a family.
Right.
That's the Malik Manual. That's the 1972 instructions out of the Nixon White House by Fred Malik that I brought forward before. Nothing in writing, head-to-head communications, mafia-level loyalty.
Yeah.
Okay, to continue. Would you please fill in where after Paul Ryan says, we're not going to talk about this, then in public, Mitch McConnell refuses to call foul when information is brought forward that there's shenanigans going on, and President Obama said to Putin, cut it out. Pedal back for me and give that further information about the complicity of Mitch McConnell, because what I'm trying to point to here is everybody in the Republican Party is filthy, filthy dirty. And the only thing that is up above the waves, that is the hood ornament on this this perverse vehicle of our country, is the hood ornament of Donald Trump. That's
Rich. If we don't, but you know, by your standards and mine, I completely agree, and you're absolutely right. You know, the Republicans are dirty. But if we fail to understand where these people are coming from, how they're thinking, what their worldview is, we will not succeed in defeating them politically. And Mitch McConnell is reflecting the interests of the billionaire class. He's a wholly owned subsidiary of probably, 20 or 30 billionaires in the United States, and maybe a few hundred multimillionaires, and the corporations that participate with them that pay these guys off. And it's not just Mitch McConnell, Paul Ryan, same thing. And some of these guys are just paid off toadies. But I think that the ones that really rise to high levels of powers, the Paul Ryans, the Mitch McConnells, the ones who get elected to the United States Senate, I think they actually believe that having a liberal democracy, a social democracy, having a country where everybody has health care, where people can go to college for free, destroys personal incentive, encourages lawlessness, encourages immorality, which they would define as everything from homosexuality to out of wedlock sex, and therefore, in their mind, this is the financial, political Republican version of the what's the phrase that the evangelicals use for a lie that it's told for a good purpose? The
noble lie. The
noble lie. Thank you. Of the noble lie. Basically, the evangelicals are all behind Trump, not because they think he's a Christian. They know he's not, or even a good man. They know he's not. They're behind him because he's going to keep their churches tax exempt and give them political power. It's just that simple. And so you've got the noble lie happening on the Christian side, and on the Republican side, by and large, you've got another noble lie, which is these guys. They've for years and years and years accused liberals of being pointy-headed, ivory tower intellectuals who think they know what's best for everybody, right? They're saying that because they're projecting. That's exactly what they are. They believe that they know the best way to run a country is to run it like a company, that the president should essentially be an autocrat, that he should surround himself with yes men, that things get done more efficiently and get done better that way, that it's better for American business. And as Herbert Hoover's Secretary of the Treasury said, or Commerce said back in the day, what's good for General Motors is good for America, that what's good for business is good for America. I think that, and if we don't understand that there are not only true believers at those high levels, and that they are willing to I believe this is the philosophy that animates Rupert Murdoch and Fox News. They're telling lies to the American people, and they know they're telling lies to American people. They're not necessarily lies of commission, where they say something that's totally false, although that happens. They're mostly lies of deletion, distortion, and generalization. The three NLP tools, by the way, that we all use all the time to make sense of the world around us. They delete important pieces of information, so they cause people to believe things that may not be true. They distort the actual information that's out there, and they generalize things massively. And as a consequence of this, they've convinced the average Joe in Michigan or in Indiana that voting Republican is somehow in their interest, when it's really not. But the noble lie, that's the noble lie that they're telling to the workers, just like the Tony Perkinses of the world, are telling their noble lie to their religious fight, and the Ralph Reeds and the Jerry Falwell Juniors are telling that noble lie, as it were, to their followers. Am I making sense, Rich?
Absolutely, and I want you to please finish the idea with them being our Achilles heel of our liberty and freedom, because this is the Gerasimov doctrine as practiced by the FSB on our political structure.
Well, and not just the FSB. This is something that has happened in pretty much every country that has become an autocracy, that has moved from democracy to autocracy. And it happens slightly differently in every country, but there are some massive commonalities. And trashing the media, by the way, is one of the very first steps. Whether it is Duterte in the Philippines, literally killing reporters after turning his country against the media, whether it's Erdogan in Turkey killing and imprisoning reporters, whether it's Pinochet in Chile, who's obviously no longer around, but he was one of the first experiments. It was that was run by the Chicago School. Milton Friedman went down there and made that happen. So this is nothing new. Now they're doing it to us.
Remember, we got targeted super fast after the Magnitsky Act.
Right.
Because we had this guy from Russia, Vladimir Kara-Murza, who's been poisoned twice. He has survived 2 poisonings, and he came to the country and our country, and he gave testimony on Capitol Hill, and he said, please help me get the Magnitsky Act into international business and banking laws so that we can challenge the legitimacy of these oligarchs' hold on their ill-gotten gains, and Putin is losing his mind.
Well, I don't think he's losing his mind right now. I think he's probably having a toast with his good buddies with some good Russian vodka. But yeah, I absolutely get what you're saying, Rich.
Right on.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the call. Devon in Washington D.C. Hey, Devon, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Well, this may be a little on the radical end, but if this happened in any other country, there's a reason that dictators don't leave, because they're going to get locked up when they get back. This is insane. And
this has happened in a bunch of other countries, Devon, if I may interrupt very briefly. This is what happened in Turkey. This is what happened in the Philippines. And I fear where I think you're going, which is that, Trump may end up declaring a state of emergency, or something might happen, or we might get attacked, in quotes. And God only knows, how long, I'm afraid to go down that road in my, I go down it in my thinking, Devon, and it scares the hell out of me. Back to you.
Actually, I wasn't going there, Tom.
Okay.
I was thinking that if we could all just get it together and arrest him at the airport, not let him back into the White House, because it is so clear that he is a traitor to our nation. And right now, they should be drawing up articles of impeachment. But at the very least, we need to stop him. Not in,
You can't do it physically, Devon. You can't stop Donald Trump at the airport. First of all, he doesn't go through airports. He's going to go through military bases.
Well, right.
But secondly, trying to do anything physical is inviting your own death or imprisonment. It's not the appropriate way. It's not the American way. I need to say this again. I think this is so important. If enough people of goodwill, if enough patriots, whether they call themselves Republicans, Independents, Democrats, Greens, Libertarians, I don't care. If enough patriots show up at the polls to overwhelm the voter suppression that's going on, to overwhelm the deletion of voters from the rolls that's going on, to overwhelm the redshift bias of voting, no paper voting machines in states like Georgia, if enough people show up at the polls that over 50% of the House of Representatives is Democrats and over 2/3 of the Senate is Democrats, then we impeach both Trump and Pence, then the Speaker of the House, a Democrat, becomes President of the United States, and you've reversed the 2016 election.
I agree.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thank you, Devon. We've got some work to do here. We've got some work. I don't see any other way to do it. And this is what Mark Pocan was talking about last Thursday. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I should clarify, Pocan wasn't saying we'll impeach both of them and, we'll make the Speaker the President. I'm saying that. But he was saying it's got to be done at the ballot box. That's the only mechanism we have. And welcome back.
And let's see here. Elizabeth in whoops, got to push the right button. Is it Elizabeth or Elizabeth in Woodville, Ohio?
Elizabeth in Brookville, Ohio.
Brookville. I'm sorry, Elizabeth. What's up?
Oh, Tom, I'm so glad. I was thinking like the other woman. Thank you for calming us down. But I believe in my heart that now it is a time for action. It's obvious that the Justice Department acted ahead of them by giving this presentation regarding the 12 indictments, because what it did is allowed people to actually see where they were coming from. See, I think that now most Americans should have a better view of what Russia did and how they did it, and how the president responds to it. He is a treason, and short of meeting him at the airport and having him arrested, I think that we need to formulate a PAPS movement, Patriots Against Putin, and that we should contact our Congress people and encourage them to start meeting, with community organizations and educating them on how to move forward and entertain other groups of people in various states and then communities, and get the job done to get this man out of office.
Yeah, but let's. My one concern, and one of the reasons why over the years I have gently pushed back on people who want to pin this whole thing on Russia, is that it's not just Putin. Putin isn't the guy who knocked 150,000 people off the voting rolls in Wisconsin just before the election where Trump won by a small margin. Putin isn't the guy who ran the voting machines in Michigan where 80,000 people voted, stood in line in Detroit for hours and hours and hours, mostly African Americans, and somehow there was no vote for president registered, and then Trump won that state by 10,000 votes. Putin wasn't the guy who did we don't know, actually. The Russians might have hacked the voting machines. But by and large, much of this stuff is not Putin. And if we don't realize that there is a large, systemic, aggressive campaign by people who call themselves conservatives but are really corporatists. They believe not in democracy but in oligarchy. They believe in plutocracy. They believe in rule by the rich, rule by the corporations, what Mussolini called fascism. If we don't keep in mind that that is going on at the same time, and frankly more powerfully and more aggressively, then we could get Putin's completely out of the sphere of American influence, ban all Russian posts from Facebook, totally lock up our voting rolls, and we would still have a problem with plutocrats and autocrats trying to run our country, or actually running our country. Am I making sense?
I agree with you, but I believe that if we Americans, some of us, have a problem looking at ourselves.
Yes.
That if you direct it somewhere else or someone else, which seems to be the direction that they take in dividing us, and which is very dangerous because, as our fourth president once said, that a country divided cannot stand.
Amen. Amen. And that's this is part of it. I mean, what Trump has done with these children from the border, what Trump has done, just right across the board. All these things should be part of the articles of impeachment. Thank you. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairtom.com is the website, xchairtom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines.
You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, Ellen Ratner's new book. On the line with us, Talk Media News' chief foreign correspondent, live from Helsinki, Luke Vargas. You can follow him on Twitter at The Courier. Luke, what's up?
Well, I think you can probably guess.
Yeah. I'd like your take on I watched the press conference. We've been talking about it for 2 hours here, but what's your take on it?
Well, I mean, I most of the specifics. There are a few things I'll highlight.
Luke, your phone is just totally breaking up. Is Skype is better? Can we take a Skype audio? Let's try that. Start over, Luke.
Okay. Let me say this.
In transcript form.
We'll go back to the phone.
Just a folly.
Okay. Luke, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to let this go because your Skype just disconnected, and we were trying to use your Skype audio, and I can't hear your phone. We'll have to. Maybe we can get you in the next hour. Give us a call back. I'm very sorry. It just is not working. Back to our telephone lines. George in Chicago. Hey, George. Thanks for listening to Chicago's Progressive Talk. What's on your mind?
And thank you, Tom, for you and your staff and all you do. You're a beacon in the midst of all this darkness.
Thank you, George.
Quite simply, I'd like to say this. In 2006, when the Democrats regained control of the House, Nancy Pelosi sadly said that impeachment was off the table, and thus we, the people, were robbed of any chance to learn of the total essence of the high crimes and misdemeanors of the Bush-Cheney administration. That can't happen now.
Yeah, I'm with you. George, I completely agree with you. And feel free to call back again later on in the week because I'm going to cut you short here because we just got Luke back on from Helsinki. My apologies, George, but I'm with you. Give us a shout back and we can continue the conversation. Luke, can we try it again?
Hey, Tom, I think this is working. It's the White House Wi-Fi network is inundated right now.
I can imagine.
We're going over to Finnish 4G.
Okay.
Seems to be
so back to the beginning.
I was saying, I think it's a folly to try and analyze President Trump in transcript form, and yet there are benefits to looking at what President Trump's prepared remarks were. Because we knew in advance of this, we were not going to get a redo of the Singapore press conference, which was freewheeling. It was, 30 questions and an hour and a half. We were told this was going to be 2 questions from each side, and I think it's safe to assume the questions from the Russian side of the aisle were probably not going to be terribly dangerous for President Trump or Putin to answer, for that matter. And to think that, let's say, the questions from the U.S. press had not been so dogged, and I do think Reuters and AP's correspondents here deserve credit for trying to elbow as much room for themselves in this press conference as possible.
I agree.
The opening statement from President Trump would have been all that we were left with. And going through that, I take particular note of the fact that Ukraine was never mentioned once. It is a territorial aggression that the Senate and the House think is unacceptable. It is the basis for a lot of other U.S. foreign policy regarding sanctions and other things, and is viewed as unacceptable to many of our allies. That was not going to get brought up at all had reporters not asked about it. I think that's quite telling. And I will point out also that the issue of the attack on the American election, alleged attack by Russia on the American election, was only given a line. And the line was from President Trump: during today's meeting, I addressed directly with the president the issue of Russian interference in our election. That was it. He then said, look, I spent a lot of time talking about it, and Putin, this is a quote that I think really shows that these guys were setting each other up. This wasn't as if we were hearing 2 presidents from 2 different nations. This really seemed to me people who, 2 men who's figured out how to support each other's positions. And Trump says, quote, President Putin may well want to address it, and very strongly, because he feels very strongly about it, And he has an interesting idea, as if to say, look, he's given me an alibi. I think it's a good alibi. Let him give it. That, to me, again, would have been all that we would have gotten from President Trump.
I agree.
On this paramount issue.
I think Trump thinks that Putin helped him win the election, and he doesn't want anybody else to think that. But I think that deep down inside, he thinks that. And you know, so maybe the conversation was, "Hey, thanks, Vlad." Anyhow, moving along.
I guess I had also sort of been predicting that one thing we might see from Putin in particular would be sort of setting President Trump up for an easy success, that Trump, feeling uncomfortable by the indictments last week, would have sort of been reaching for some sort of big deliverable, as we'd say. And my prediction is you'd have these two sides agree to resume the New START treaty nuclear drawdown process. And we didn't get that. I mean, instead, the only sort of promises here that they're going to meet more. Trump says the relationship is better. We've turned a new chapter, that, you know, businessmen from the two countries are going to meet. But besides that, it was really...
I thought Putin mentioned the START talks in his prepared remarks.
I believe he mentioned the fact that he was complaining about the deployment of U.S. missile systems to parts of Europe that were not. And that's actually quite the opposite, right? It's a dig at the United States, not an appeal for more cooperation. So we don't really leave here with much in hand, to be sure.
I look forward to actually reading both those transcripts later on today with a slightly clearer head, as it were, you know, rather than just all the vibrancy
still a
of the
blur,
moment.
I will say.
There you go. Luke Vargas, you can follow him on Twitter at The Courier. Thanks, Luke.
Thank you, Tom.
Good talking with you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com.
Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at thomsbeats.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom.
We're reading today from Jesse Eisinger's new book, shall we call it the Chicken Poop Club? Why the Justice Department Fails to Prosecute Executives. This is from the introduction. It's from page 15 in the introduction. Boom, bust, and crackdown. America's economic history is unfolded in a series of booms, followed by busts, followed crucially by crackdowns. After the stock market crash of 1929, congressional hearings channeled public outrage and resulted in landmark laws regulating Wall Street and creating the Securities and Exchange Commission in 1934. A few years later, a new SEC helped put the head of the mighty New York Stock Exchange in prison. Though inconsistent, the SEC over the intervening decades emerged as one of the most respected government regulatory bodies. The SEC is the most important corporate regulator, overseeing publicly traded companies in the nation's capital markets, money markets. The agency has civil powers, must team up with the various offices of the Justice Department when a securities laws violation turns into a criminal investigation, After the go-go years of the late 1960s, the SEC worked closely with the Southern District to take on top law firms, top accounting firms, and top executives who had helped perpetrate corporate frauds. After the savings and loan scandals of the 1980s, when hundreds of small banks across the country failed due to reckless real estate loans, the Department of Justice prosecuted over 1,000 people, including top executives of many of the largest failed banks. After the Michael Milken-run junk bomb boom and blow-up of the late 1980s, prosecutors spent years digging up evidence of stock manipulation and insider trading at major investment banks and law firms, prosecuting some of the most powerful Wall Street figures of the era. In the early 2000s, the NASDAQ bubble burst. The NASDAQ bubble revealed a corporate book-cooking pandemic. Top officers from giants such as Enron, WorldCom, Quest Communications, Adelphia, and Tyco International ended up in prison. Recklessness and stupidity fuel booms, but usually so do crimes. By contrast, after the 2008 financial crisis, the government failed. In response to the worst calamity to hit capital markets and the global economy since the Great Depression, the government did not charge any top bankers. The public was furious. Bank bailouts and a lack of consequences for banksters radicalized both ends of the political spectrum and gave rise to two of the most potent social movements of our time, Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street. Anger about the lack of Wall Street accountability seeded disenchantment with Obama. The 2016 insurgency of Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, who challenged frontrunner Hillary Clinton almost to the doors of the Democratic Convention, demonstrated the anger that remained on the left years after the apex of the crisis, undergirding mistrust about Clinton. She had given friendly, fateful, and highly compensated speeches to investment banks. While a Republican president had presided over the crisis and a Democratic one had saved the financial system, Hillary Clinton, Obama, and the Democrats could not claim to be the protectors of the working class and the scourges of investment bankers. That was due in large measure to the lack of corporate prosecutions. According to the Wall Street Journal, analysis of 156 criminal and civil cases brought by the Justice Department, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission against 10 of the largest banks on Wall Street since 2009, in 81% of the cases, the government neither charged nor even identified individual employees. In the remainder, the government only charged 47 low and mid-level employees. Merely one was a boardroom-level executive whom the SEC charged civilly rather than criminally. In his own incoherent and superficial ways, Donald Trump rode anger about Wall Street throughout his campaign, railing at the bank's power. He closed his campaign by hinting poisonously about a cabal of global bankers rigging the system. He assailed politicians who were owned by Goldman Sachs, Trump's word. His first Ted Cruz in the primary and then Hillary Clinton in the general. The Republican platform called for breaking up the big banks by returning to the Glass-Steagall Act, the Depression-era law that splits commercial bank from investment banking, a reflection of resentment about the government bailout of the financial system as the bankers wriggled free. No sooner had Trump taken office, though, than he rushed to stuff members of that cabal into his White House and cabinet. He and Goldman alumni who advised him moved within days of taking office to unravel Dodd-Frank and loosen restrictions on corporations generally. It's commonplace to observe that no top bankers from the top financial firms went to prison for the widespread malfeasance that led to the 2008 financial crisis. It's such a socially acceptable opinion that no less than an inside-the-beltway figure than the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, said after he was safely out of office that more bankers should have gone to prison. The problem is worse than that. Today's Justice Department has lost the will and indeed the ability to go after the highest level corporate wrongdoers. The problem did not begin in the aftermath of the 2008 crash, and it has not ended. Prosecutors don't simply struggle to put executives for too big to fail banks in prison. They also cannot hold accountable wrongdoing executives from a gamut of large corporations, from pharmaceutical to technology to large industrial operations to retail giants. And, the book goes on from there, laying out exactly who and how and why. It's extraordinary. The Chicken Beep Club.
Apparently
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I have been, for the last 2 hours, if you're just tuning in, talking about how I think there is a meaningful and qualitative difference between billionaires who have been given the legal ability by a corrupt Supreme Court. And I think that Thomas and Scalia, for example, going and speaking to the Koch brothers events, Scalia hanging out with Dick Cheney, going duck hunting with him, and then deciding in his favor in the Supreme Court a few weeks later. I think there's a meaningful difference between corrupt billionaires corrupting our democracy and electing people who will dance to their tune, and foreign governments corrupting our democracy, whether it's through poisoning channels of information, like the massive number of advertisements on Facebook, or whether it's through hacking into electronic voting machines, which appears to have happened, or whether it's, I guess there's a variety of techniques that have been, and strategies that have been employed here. I think that there is a significant and qualitative difference there. And that when Donald Trump is putting his legitimacy as President of the United States and I actually believe he believes this, and his belief that he wouldn't be president if it wasn't for the help of foreign governments, specifically Russia. When he puts that ahead of the interests of the country of which he is president, you can be impeached for high crimes, for misdemeanors, which is what they went after Bill Clinton for, or for treason. And I think that moves into the realm of treason. Either collaborating with a foreign power, as apparently was done by Manafort and Fred's. Excuse me, I had to sneeze there. Where during when the Republican Party changed their position, relative to Russia and Ukraine and all that, and I'm very ambivalent about the whole Ukraine-Crimea thing. I mean, it's not as simple or as cut and dry as we tend to think, and there's a history there that goes even way back before World War II. And there's a history there of the United States meddling in elections in Ukraine, as in Syria, Russia has a military base in Crimea, and they have a military base in Syria. We protect our military bases around the world, and many of them are in countries run by dictators, and we're fine with that. I get all that, but this is a whole different thing. Those are areas where we can have foreign policy debates. What's more important? Is it more, is it more important to quote stand up for Crimea? That's a foreign policy debate we can have internally. But when you're talking about a foreign country messing with your elections, and the person who is the beneficiary of that not saying, wait a minute, we got a problem, then you're in the area of treason, in my opinion. And the reason, if for no other reason, and somebody needs to point this out to Donald Trump, and in fact, this may be the conversation that his national security advisor is having with him right now, is, Donald, if you think that Vladimir Putin helped make you president, and you don't want to mess with, you don't want the so-called witch hunt investigation into Russian involvement in the American elections, you don't want that to continue. Do you realize that if you piss off Putin, he might be the guy who takes you out in 2.5 years, metaphorically speaking, electorally speaking? Don't you get it? If you're allowing a foreign power to mess with our elections, anything can happen. It's not just always going to inure to your benefit to you. And Trump doesn't get that. And the whole thing with Trump and autocrats, I've been talking about this throughout the show today. I think it's worth recapping very, very quickly, and then I'm going to get back to your phone calls, because a lot of you have been on hold for a long time, and a lot of people are very passionate about this stuff. Number one, now is not the time to despair. Now is not the time to say, oh my God, it's just terrible. Look at what's happened. I mean, you know, you've got Chris Kobach pushing people off the voting rolls, and you've got voting machines that don't count votes, and you've got and then you got, you know, foreign governments messing, you know, propagating fake news, and you got a billionaire Rupert Murdoch, you know, with a television network that regularly deletes, distorts, and generalizes information to the point that good and decent and intelligent people, and I met a few of them in Orlando over the weekend, who are mostly informed by Fox News, are tragically malinformed. Not just misinformed, malinformed about actual, real, you know, politics and economic and international, but particularly domestic policy issues, you know, because it works to the benefit of the billionaire class. To have to have the people of the United States believe that what's best for the billionaires is best for them, and thus vote Republican. I mean, we've got all this stuff happening at the same time, and the reason I think that Trump is much more friendly with autocrats, the reason I think Trump, if you looked at his body language this morning when he was sitting there with President Putin, Trump was praying. I mean that literally. Take a look at the picture. He was holding his hands in front of him, between his legs, between his knees, in a gesture of prayer. This is how we pray. He was the supplicant. And Putin was leaning back in his chair, his body tilted, his legs spread apart, like, I'm the boss here. And Trump was praying. Now, I don't think he was praying that the PP tapes don't come out. I don't think he cares. I mean, you know, the tape came out of him saying that he grabs women by the crotch and you know, and he can get away with it. And he does it regularly. He still got elected. I don't think he cares if the PP tape comes out. I think what he cares about is if Putin was to say to a few of his buddy Russian oligarchs, hey, you know that $300 million you loaned Trump? You know that $1 billion you loaned Trump? You know that $3 billion that you used to buy Trump properties? Get your money back. And Trump's entire business empire goes down. That's what I think is going on. That's what I think Trump is afraid of. And frankly, I don't think Russia has to even threaten it. Trump knows. Putin doesn't have to say a word. Trump's own son, Eric, back in, I think it was in 2013, told a reporter for one of the financial papers when they asked, you know, okay, you know, your father just had his 5th or 6th bankruptcy. Are you having, you know, problems with your real estate business? He was, no. He said, we're no longer going to American banks. We're getting our money from Russia. And he didn't mean the Russian government or Putin. He meant the Russian oligarchs. But the Russian oligarchs, I mean, this is another thing about Russia and their economy that I think it's really important to point out. Russia has an economy that's roughly the size of Texas's economy, right? The GDP of Russia and the GDP of Texas are very similar. It's not one of the largest countries in the world economically. It is physically. I think it's the 2nd largest after China. It's got a huge population. It's got massive natural resources. And it has tremendous potential as a nation, but economically not so much. Why is that? I personally believe, and you know, Louise and I were in Moscow before the fall of the Soviet Union. We just went through for a couple of days as tourists. It was fascinating. We were there after the fall of the Soviet Union. I was in Hungary with my friend Jerry Schneiderman, my best friend. We were sitting in a cafe in Budapest as the refugees were starting to come in from East Germany when the wall was coming down. You know, I've been there. I've seen it. I worked with the Salem International organization, saleminternational.org, in Kaliningrad, which is part of Russia. In fact, it used to be the high security area because it's near a submarine base. In fact, I wrote a chapter about this in one of my books. Working with a local community that was teaching agricultural practices as
these people were coming out of the shock of the fall of the Soviet Union. I was in Russia the day of the election that was the first election in the history of Russia when Boris Yeltsin was elected. I was there, watching TV with the Russian family. We were working in this charity group. And what happened was the Chicago boys did, in my opinion, did the same thing to Russia that they did to Chile, that they're trying to do now to the United States. They went into Russia and they said, okay, you know, your economy is no longer communist. Here's what you do. You take all the publicly owned property and you privatize it. And you give it to the people and you let the people sell it however they want. And the people were very, very poor. And so they were selling off their apartments and they were selling off their cars and they were selling off their goods and they were selling off their shares in the big national companies like the oil companies and the steel companies and the gas companies. And the people who were connected with the government and who had access to big money and banking, they were buying these chits up, C-H-I-T-S, they were like coupons that everybody was given. They were buying these things up and they ended up, and this was absolutely predictable from my point of view, because Russia, quote, liberalized along the lines of libertarian/Republican economics. Russia went from the potential of being a high-functioning economy and a high-functioning democracy to being more of an autocratic oligarchy, where, you know, the very, very rich are the ones who have the political power. Much like the United States is becoming right now, thanks to our Supreme Court, bought and paid for by, you know, the billionaires among us. So, you know, I mean, you can blame Milton Friedman for a lot of this, frankly. But this is where we're at. And in my opinion, the only solution is to take the House of Representatives, and it may not happen in this election, it may happen in 2020, but to take the House of Representatives and take 2/3 of the Senate and initiate impeachment proceedings against both Trump and Pence, who is absolutely 100% complicit in the whole thing and was in charge of the transition team. And when they're out, the Speaker of the House becomes president, who would be a Democrat. And you would have effectively reversed the 2016 elections. I'll pick up your phone calls on the other side of this break. It's 18.5 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's talk media for the sane among us, the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with your calls after this. And welcome back. Doug in Reno Valley, California. Am I saying that right, Doug?
Hi, my compliments.
Thank you. Back at you.
I want your opinion on if Democrats get Congress back, what's the first thing they should do?
If by Congress, do you mean the House of Representatives or both the House and the Senate?
No, I don't think we're going to get the Senate, but
yeah. You know, anything's possible, but the Koch brothers are pouring, you know, millions and millions of dollars into this election, so it's going to be a big challenge. But if they get the House of Representatives, I think the first thing that they should do is basically a variation on what the Republicans did when they took control of Congress in the Newt Gingrich Revolution in I forget which year it was, whether it was 94 or 96, but you know, while Bill Clinton was president. And initiate massive congressional investigations into every aspect of what the Trump administration has been doing. They should initiate investigations into, obviously, you know, the Trump-Russia stuff. They should initiate public investigations into the destruction of the Environmental Protection Agency. They should initiate investigations into who benefited from Ryan Zinke selling off public lands. They should initiate investigations into Mick Mulvaney and his taking apart the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They should initiate investigations into Betsy DeVos and her ownership of some of these companies that are holding these immigrant children for $700 a night, and her support for ending public education functionally as we know it. They should initiate investigations into Wilbur Ross's involvement with, you know, Russian banks and other banks, the Bank of Cyprus and all this stuff. I mean, there is so much dirt in this administration that needs to be, you know, the rug needs to be lifted and it needs to be swept out. And this can only be done with the power of a subpoena, and only the party in power has the power of subpoena in either the House or the Senate. So what they should do is they should use that subpoena power as aggressively as they can and constantly, without stop, every single day. They should be looking into these things, and they should be doing it in a very public way. Does that make sense, Doug?
Yeah, I didn't expect that much detail. I thought you were going to say, well, Citizens United or term limits on the Supreme Court.
You're not going to get any of that stuff until you got 2/3 of the Senate.
Damn.
And you're not going to get impeachment until you've got 2/3 of the Senate, unless the bills that are put forward. Now, the wild card here, Doug, and it's a really important one to remember. The wild card is if Mueller comes out with indictments that actually get into the Trump organization itself and that get into the Republican Party beyond the hangers-on, the Papadopouloses and the Gates and the Manaforts, who are basically exploiting their position and corrupting the Republican Party, but not necessarily with the enthusiastic consent of the Republican Party. But if they can demonstrate that there was actual high crimes and misdemeanors and treason committed by Donald Trump himself, by members of his family, and I'm thinking, like the meeting in Trump Tower to try, with the Russians to try and get information on Hillary Clinton, stuff like that. I'm guessing that there's a whole lot more than just that. And when this stuff starts to come down and get visible, I mean, this is what Strzok was talking about. He talked Peter Strzok, the FBI agent, he was our #1 spy catcher, right? And this is what he was talking about. He was like, there was serious stuff here. We need to be worried, and we still don't know what that stuff is. So when that stuff comes out, that may change the equation even more. But I think that using the power of the subpoena is going to be the most powerful thing they can do. And that, by the way, is what the Republicans did in the 90s, and it worked for them. Doug, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairtom.com is the website, xchairtom.com.
Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, THOM.
We're reading.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. You've heard my rant. I'm with me too, I guess. Somebody called a minute ago, and I think this is a really important point. I want to reiterate it, emphasize it again. And that is that if the Democrats take the House of Representatives, people are like, what should we do? What should our first priority be? And they may take the Senate too. But in particular, it looks like there's a very good chance the Democrats are going to take the House of Representatives, notwithstanding voter suppression and the millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of the Koch brothers. But if they take the House of Representatives, the weapon that they will have handed to them is the subpoena. The ability to compel witnesses to come before Congress and publicly testify. The Republicans used this against Peter Strzok from the FBI last week, which was bizarre in the extreme. It was like an old Soviet show trial. But the Republicans have used this successfully. The Democrats need to, too, if they take control of the House. That's the thing that they have to do. Jenny in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Jenny, what's on your mind?
I'm very concerned on all the things that you've covered. We are all worried about. I'd like to comment that I don't think Trump's beyond crashing this country and putting it in chaos to keep himself and his family out of jail. And the second thing, he, at the time of the election, when he came in the White House, he said, I don't care how the numbers look. It's rigged. I'll just walk in there. So who's to to take and actually figure that man may not remove himself, even if the votes show he has a legitimate reason to get the hell out of there. He may not go.
Jenny, I have a lot of faith in our institutions, what Donald Trump refers to as the deep state.
They're all weakened now. He attacks all of them, and the majority,
except for the military,
are believing it.
Except for the military. And you know, clearly the problem that we have with the military is much of the military watches Fox News, and so they're badly informed. They don't know actually what's going on in the world. But you know, setting that aside for the moment, I actually believe, I have confidence in our institutions. I think if Trump were to say, if he were to lose the election of 2020, if he's running for re-election and refused to leave the White House, I think the military would escort him out. That would be
Thank you.
That would be the breaking point. And there's no doubt in my mind.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind about that. And I'll tell you, when I lived in Washington D.C., as you know, we lived on a boat at the Capitol Yacht Club in a community of people. The majority of them were military, mostly Navy, but a lot of military people. And I got to know a lot of these folks, and many of them were Trump supporters, but they would not put up with that. No way, no way. And I'm talking about like literally admirals. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
More of your calls, my thoughts, and the news of the obvious news of the day right after the sticker.
Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Fight for the Four Freedoms, What Made FDR and the Greatest Generation Truly Great, by Professor Harvey J. Kaye, who's a professor of democracy and justice studies at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. This is from the introduction, page 1. We need to remember. We need to remember what conservatives have never wanted us to remember and what liberals have all too often forgotten. Now, after more than 30 years of subordinating the public good to corporate priorities and private greed, of subjecting ourselves to widening inequality and intensifying insecurities, and of denying our democratic impulses and yearnings, we need to remember. We need to remember who we are. We need to remember that we are the children and grandchildren of the men and women who rescued the United States from the economic destruction of the Great Depression and defended it against fascism and imperialism in the Second World War. We need to remember that we are the children and grandchildren of the men and women who not only saved the nation from economic ruin and political oblivion, but also turned it into the strongest and most prosperous country on earth. And most of all, we need to remember that we are the children and grandchildren of the men and women who accomplished all that in the face of powerful, conservative, reactionary, and corporate opposition, and despite all their own faults and failings, by making America freer, more equal, and more democratic than ever before. Now, when all they fought for is under siege, and we, too, find ourselves confronting crises and forces that threaten the nation and all that it stands for, now we need to remember that we are the children and grandchildren of the most progressive generation in American history. We are the children of the men and women who articulated, fought for, and endowed us with the promise of the four freedoms. On the afternoon of January 6, 1941, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt went up to Capitol Hill to deliver his annual message to Congress. Just weeks earlier, he had defeated the Republican Wendell Willkie at the polls and won re-election to an unprecedented third term. But Roosevelt now faced a far greater challenge, one even more daunting than those he confronted in his first and second terms. Still stalked by the Great Depression, the United States was also increasingly threatened by the Axis power, Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, Imperial Japan. And with war already raging east and west, Americans had yet to agree about how to respond to the danger. The president, however, did not falter. He not only proceeded to propose measures to address the emergency, he gave dramatic new meaning to all men are created equal, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we the people of the United States, a new birth of freedom, and government of the people, by the people, and for the people. FDR knew about crises, but he knew as well what Americans could accomplish even in the darkest of times. Born in 1882, he had grown up privileged, the son of New York Hudson River gentry. Yet long before becoming president, he had suffered serious defeats and setbacks, none more devastating than contracting polio in 1921 at the age of 39. The disease left him permanently unable to stand up or walk without assistance. However, supported by his wife Eleanor and other family members and friends, he had risen above the paralysis to become the most dynamic political figure in the United States. Moreover, his experiences and encounters in the course of doing so had reaffirmed and deepened his already powerful faith and confidence in God, in himself, and in his fellow citizens, all of which had enabled him, in the face of the worst economic and social catastrophe in the nation's history, to defiantly state that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, and then go on to proclaim this generation of Americans has a rendezvous with destiny. Armed with this faith and confidence and propelled by the popular energies that his words and elections elicited, he determinedly pursued the initiatives of relief, recovery, reconstruction, and reform known as the New Deal. Together, president and people severely tested each other, made mistakes and regrettable compromises, and suffered defeats and disappointments. Nevertheless, challenging each other to live up to their finest ideals, Roosevelt and his fellow citizens advanced them further than either had expected or even imagined possible. Confronting fierce, conservative, reactionary, and corporate opposition, they not only rejected authoritarianism, but also redeemed the nation's historic purpose and promise by initiating revolutionary changes in American government and public life and radically extending American freedom, equality, and democracy. They subjected big business to public account and regulation, empowered the federal government to address the needs of working people, mobilized and organized labor unions, fought for their rights, broadened and leveled the we and we the people, established a social security system, expanded the nation's public infrastructure, improved the environment, cultivated the arts, and refashioned popular culture. And while much remained to be done, they imbued themselves with fresh democratic convictions, hopes, and aspirations. Standing before the American people and their assembled representatives that early January day, the president surely believed their rendezvous with destiny had come. He told them straightforwardly that Americans were now confronting a moment unprecedented in the history of the United States. A moment unprecedented because never before had American security been as seriously threatened from without. And he refused to appease those who threatened our nation's safety. The book is The Fight for the Four Freedoms by Harvey Kaye.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Zach in North Hollywood, California. Hey, Zach, what's on your mind today?
Oh, Tom, good to speak with you. You know, your substitute, Jefferson Smith, is got such great insights and perspectives tinged with a little bit of humor. What a great guy he is.
I'm so glad to hear that. Jefferson is one of my favorite people. He's been around politics. He served in the House of Representatives here in the state of Oregon years ago. He started the Bus Project, which is one of the big, one of the good, big progressive organizations. Started a progressive radio station here in town. He's been around the block, and he's a good guy, and he's a lawyer. In fact, I think he's a Harvard graduate.
And I want to visit a point that he makes over and over, that it's really not a right and left. It really never was, but to me, it's the 10% daddy downers versus us 90% bottom uppers.
Yep.
But the daddy downers have the capital to trick you into liking them.
Yep. That's exactly what's going on.
Trump's base has to realize, man, these free market guys, it's not even politics anymore. Our future is being projected by white-collar criminals. The free market means the freedom to destroy and exploit anything you want to leverage profit, including democracy.
Yep. Very, very well said, Zach. Very well said.
See ya. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the call. Excellent comment. Sam in Canton, North Carolina. Hey, Sam, what's on your mind?
I would like for you and everyone else in the media to stop speaking about Donald Trump as though he is an intelligent man. He's not. There is a word that we used to use more. It's now politically incorrect. The word is stupid.
Yeah.
And a famous movie character once said, "Stupid is as stupid does." If you look at what Donald Trump does, if you can bring yourself to listen to one of his speeches, and I usually want to break something when I hear one of them, he does not speak in coherent sentences. He doesn't even speak in complete sentences. He stands there and psychobabbles. And one thing that I've noticed, because I'll look up the venues he's been speaking in the past several weeks, he has not spoken to a crowd of more than 7,000 in months. And there were 10,000.
You know why that is?
Say what?
Do you know why that is? I can tell you. I can tell you why that is.
Because he can't get a larger crowd than that without having a bunch of people protesting him.
Well, it's a variation on that. The only people that they let in are people who have donated to the Trump campaign, so that they know that they are loyal Republicans, people who have a history of donating to the Trump campaign. That's the only way to get an invitation to these, because these are actually campaign rallies. These are not President of the United States speaking to the people, town hall things. But if I may, Sam, before we move on, you said you don't think Donald Trump is smart. I think it all depends on how you define smart. I don't think he's smart academically. I don't think he's smart intellectually. I doubt his IQ is over 110, but he is sly. This guy has what used to be called street smarts, and he's using them not for, for the good force. He's using them for the evil force. But this guy has a long history of manipulating people, of threatening, of bullying, of bluffing. I mean, he's got, and street smarts is even, generally considered to be a positive, and I mean it in its most negative sense. But I think in that context, we cannot ignore the fact that he knows what he's doing, and he knows how to do it very, very well. He's been doing it his whole life, and he's doing it now to his country. Back to you, Sam.
This is from Tony Schwartz, the man who co-wrote Art of the Deal.
Right.
And I quote, "We are in a true emergency. He now lives inside his own version of reality almost 100% of the time, and that reality has almost nothing to do with the reality the rest of us know it."
I agree. Yeah. And it's an echo chamber, by the way, and I think this is really important to note, that largely exists on Fox News, which is acting like state television did during the Soviet Union. And that is a tragedy for American democracy. It's just a plain old, flat-out, screaming tragedy. Sam, thanks a lot for the call. Wolfgang in Greenwich, Connecticut. Hey, Wolfgang, what's up?
Thank you, Tom, for taking my call. Big fan.
Thank you.
Tom, what do you think about the Dr. Chomskys and the Chris Hedges and the Ralph Naders of the world that say there's 3,000 American corporations or subsidiaries or holding companies in Russia, including companies from the military-industrial complex like Boeing, and out of the 5,000 largest corporations in Russia, 3,000 are American. Then there's Germans, and does that have an influence on their elections? That so much foreign American capital is over there, and the fact that these corporations are over there, these holding companies. It seems that whatever Trump may have done or the Russians may have done is a tiny amount compared to whether Starbucks just opened its 100th store or J.P. Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs are the three largest banks in Russia. It just seems that people like Chomsky who say nation states don't exist anymore and it's really about corporations and that the media wants to say one thing or another. How do you answer that?
I think that it's a matter of scale. I think that, first of all, I don't know I know that Chomsky quote, but I don't know his thoughts on Russia or Hedges or the others. But the thing to keep in mind is that Russia's economy is about the same size as the state of Texas. And that's the entire GDP, the entire economy. And a very, very large slice of that is the state oil and gas companies. And, some privatized, some semi-privatized, some still owned by the Russian government. And so what's left over, what the rest of their economy is far smaller than the state of Texas. So I don't see how that kind of, I could get the economic power of China altering American corporate behavior. We saw Facebook going along with censorship. We saw Google going along with censorship in China. We saw American companies manufacturing equipment to sell to the Chinese government to allow them not just to spy on their own people, but to track their own people down and execute them when they say things the government doesn't like. We have been seeing this for some time. We see American companies violating the core principles that this country, espouses for a buck. Because in China, it's hundreds of billions of bucks. But Russia's economy is not that big. Like I said, it's smaller than the state of Texas. It's an important country. It's geographically and strategically a very important country. It is, I believe, the second largest country in the world physically. It's got a large population. It's got huge natural resources. There's a lot that could be done with Russia. I think that it has devolved into oligarchy as the same direction that we're moving as a result of the guys who went over there when Boris Yeltsin was first elected from the Chicago School of Economics, the Milton Friedman guys, who said, hey, we're going to prove that libertarian economics works. And that's what they executed when they changed the Soviet Union into Russia. And guess what? Libertarian economics always ends in oligarchy and plutocracy. And there you are. But I doubt that that the economy is so large there that it would cause Boeing, for example, to say to a senator, hey, we really want to protect our Russian business, and if you do something that might embarrass Russia, we're not going to support you anymore. If that's what you're implying, am I correct in understanding, Wolfgang, your concern?
Well, no. Well, if the 5,000 largest corporations in the United States, if 3,000 of them were Russian and they were controlling the banking, the largest, and the resources, and they were subsidiaries.
Yeah. Where'd you get that number from? Wolfgang, I've never heard anything like that. Where'd you get that from?
Well, you can Google it. If you.
Well, that doesn't make it true. What's the source?
You have to let me give you my sources.
Go for it,
Tom. Before you.
Please.
If you Google it in Washington, there's many different ways of finding out how many American corporations, what are the largest ones in Russia, right. And that would seem, if they're controlling their economy, that's a huge more influence on us controlling their natural resources and their economy and everything else versus some guy, sending some hacks in the computer. And to compare the two to people like Chomsky and Chris Hedges, and as I said, it's more about not nation states, but about corporate control of the globe. And I was just wondering your opinion because I know you're very sharp, and I just wondered.
I think corporate control of the globe is destroying democracy. I think that if you'll recall, when the book was written, The End of History and the Last Man, which came out in the early 2000s, or maybe the late 90s, I think it was the early 2000s. It was after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and I'm drawing a blank on the author's name, but he was one of the more famous semi-neoconservative authors. But basically, the theory was that with the fall of the Soviet Union, capitalism has now triumphed, and that's going to lead to the spreading of democracy all over the world. This was the neoconservative sales pitch, and this was embedded in the philosophy that was behind the whole group that Jeb Bush was part of back in '98, that was arguing for the invasion of Iraq and et cetera. And I think that history has demonstrated that that's not the case. And in fact, what we've seen is in the last decade or so, the last 15, 20 years, we've seen a number of countries that previously used to be quite democratic, like the Philippines, like Turkey, like Hungary, become autocratic states. And the hope for Russia was that it would become a democratic state, but because they organized their economy and let these big corporations in and created these autocrats along the lines of libertarian economics, we have this mess they have that mess that they have. And we have a similar mess. It's a different scale, but we have a similar mess here in the United States with a small handful of billionaires basically controlling our politics as well. So I get what you're saying, Wolfgang. I get what you're saying. Thanks a lot for the call. I would love to see a source of information about, what the actual slicing, dicing of the Russian economy is, because I just don't know. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
In fact, Wolfgang, if you think you can find a good source on that, or if anybody else does, just tweet it to me. I read my Twitter feed. I'll check it out. We'll be back. And welcome back. Jordan in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Jordan, what's on your mind today?
Thanks for taking my call, Tom. I just wanted to say I kind of disagreed with your point. I don't subscribe to the theory that it's purely a business motivation. And the evidence that I have to support that.
Wait, hang on just a second. There's something missing here. Are you talking about Donald Trump's apparent love for Vladimir Putin?
Correct.
Okay.
So, and the evidence I have to support that would be these three pieces. I think the tariffs, which are the retaliation that's coming from China, is designed to hurt his voting base.
Right.
He does not care about that piece. The second piece is on July 4th when he posted the picture of his children of 46 and 47. I think that also was a warning shot, saying, I don't care about your political norms. And third,
wait a second. He posted I don't know about this picture on July 4th. Tell me about it.
There's a picture of his children.
You mean
I don't know if
you mean Don Jr., Eric, and Ivanka?
Correct.
Okay.
And on the only caption on it is 46 and 47.
In other words, the next two presidents.
Correct.
Huh. Okay.
And then the last piece is this last weekend, how he continually referred to his administration as a regime. These three things to me are saying this has nothing to do with business. He wants this country for himself, and Putin has challenged him and said, are you strong enough to take it? And he looks up to strong people, and so he's trying to do everything that he can to be part of that challenge.
You know, Jordan, I don't think we're that far apart. I have been saying this for some time, that Putin admires autocrats because autocrats run countries like CEOs run businesses, which is the only thing Trump knows. His father owned the business. His father gave him the business, essentially. He's been an autocrat his entire life. He looks at our country and says, what's this democracy thing? I can get things done faster and better by myself with my merry band of billionaires. We should be running everything. And that's what he's trying to do. It's what he's been trying to do for a year and a half, and what he has actually been successfully doing, selling off public lands, destroying the environment. And he's doing it because and I think that, you know, many of these guys, you know, Erdogan, Orban in Hungary, you know, Duterte in the Philippines, Xi in China, you know, I think these guys actually believe, and there may be some truth to it, by the way, that it's easier to run a country if you run it like a company than it is to have that messy thing called democracy, where everybody gets to debate and everybody gets to vote, and sometimes the people don't get it right, and sometimes it gets screwed up, and the people who should be in power are no longer in power, and all that kind of thing. And so I would say, Jordan, that I essentially agree with you.
I would actually, I would say I agree as well. I don't like it being masked that these are business decisions, and that because it has to do with judges or other type of things that the Republican oligarchs are advocating for.
Oh, I get your point. No, I've been saying all along, there are multiple layers to this, and that are completely missed by the media because they try to simplify everything down to a bumper sticker, and missed by many of our politicians. You know, Trump is admiring Putin as an autocrat, number one. Number two, he wants to have a hotel in Moscow. He was negotiating, you know, Michael Cohen was negotiating it right up to a few months before the election. You know, so there is a business piece to it. Number three, he has this worldview that running a country like a company is the best way to run a country, which is a variation on the conservative philosophy that was laid out in the 50s by Russell Kirk. And has been followed by the Republican Party ever since. So I agree with you. I think and it's multidimensional, and it diminishes our political discussions to not acknowledge that and to make it all about, you know, the boogeyman of Vladimir Putin. That's where I push back. Jordan, thanks a lot for the call. Very, very well said. We'll be right back.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairtom.com is the website, xchairtom.com.
Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, THOM.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Paul in North San Juan, California. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. What's on my mind is the amount of attention that MSNBC and the other big channels, television companies, and your program too, devote to Donald Trump and his activities.
Paul, if you were in, thank you for your opinion. If you were in Germany in 1933, and I'm not even going to go there. Brent, I do. By the way, Paul, agree with you on the media that represents itself as news, and that would be the so-called news networks. If you're representing yourself as news, you should cover the news and people should be well informed. I am not representing myself as news. This is an opinion show. This is talk radio. And so if I want to talk about, how I think Donald Trump is selling us down the tubes for 3 hours, that's fine with me, and you can choose to listen or not. But I do agree that I think with the larger point that you're trying to make, which is, and this is how Trump won the primary, by the way. And frankly, I think probably largely how he won the general election, is he got literally billions of dollars worth of free television time and people thought they were watching the news, and in fact what they were watching was the Trump reality show / propaganda machine. Brent in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, Brent, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, thank you. So you keep referencing the book from the 50s. I forgot the author's name.
Russell Kirk, The Conservative Mind.
Yes, and how, giving middle-class people a vote is going to mess everything up. That wasn't a new thought in the 50s. I mean, even
You're right.
Plato was discussing that, and Socrates.
Oh, Alexander Hamilton was an advocate of this, of only property owners being allowed to vote, and the president being a lifetime appointment.
But if we look at Socrates' example, he kind of believed you run it like a company, but the key was to have philosophers, people who actually have good thoughts. Donald Trump fails the idea of a philosopher, as does George W. Bush.
Well, and this is how
go on down the line.
This was how Jefferson sold the Electoral College. And it wasn't just Jefferson, by the way. Ben Franklin was in on this, and there were a few others. They looked at the Iroquois Confederacy, and Ben Franklin, they had some 30 representatives of the Iroquois Confederacy that they invited to the opening ceremonies of the Constitutional Convention in I believe it was August or maybe July of 1787. And Ben Franklin got up and gave this speech where he said, if 5 nations of ignorant savages, and this is pretty much word for word, you can Google it. 5 nations of ignorant savages have been able to forge a union which has existed in peace for 1,000 years, then certainly 13 colonies of educated Englishmen can do the same. And he didn't mean ignorant savages as a slur. They admired the Iroquois Confederacy. And so the idea of the Electoral College, it was helping preserve the strength that the Senate also helped preserve of the small states. And the states that had small white populations, which included states like Georgia, in other words, the slave states. But also the theory that Jefferson and Franklin used to sell the Electoral College was these people are independent of political influence. They actually don't have to vote the way that the people who sent them to the Electoral College asked them to vote. And it's happened a half a dozen times in our history where electors have said, the people in the district that I'm representing voted for, Lyndon Johnson for president, but I'm going to vote for Richard Nixon or whatever. No, it wasn't Nixon, whoever it was. You get my point. And the idea that they would be the best and brightest, that people would select, because communities, or political parties now, but originally, when the country was put together, there were not political parties, and it was supposed to be communities, would select their smartest, wisest elders to be members of the Electoral College. And it was based on something that was referred to by the or based on something that was from the old pre-Anglo-Saxon, from the Whig histories, before the invasion of Europe by the Romans. And Jefferson writes about this at length, and you'll find this in Tacitus. Tacitus wrote about this in a book that Jefferson recommended, and I read back in the day, that they had this thing called the Wicca Gemeinschaft. or a word like that. I'm probably making it sound more German than it sounded, but the language that they spoke was a variation on German, and the very and they were largely red-haired people, which Jefferson thought was really cool. And it was like the Council of Wise Elders. And just like the Iroquois, once a year, each community would elect one man to be the wise elder, who would go to the whole big meeting, and would come back and say, okay, here's what we're all thinking about. The women in the community would vote. Then the man would have to go back and say, here's what we're going to do. And Jefferson and Franklin wanted to do the same thing. They just wanted to cut the women out of the equation. And so it was based on that Iroquois Confederacy thing in some ways. And it's just a fascinating history. But they were pulling it from Plato too, and the Native Americans. So I don't know what to do with that, Brent. But it's an interesting history.
I really do wish that we could have intelligent folks in charge.
I agree.
And get rid of some of the democracy.
I agree. And I think if we could get money out of politics and get the billionaires out so that they can no longer basically hire their toadies to do their bidding in Congress, that we'd have a whole lot better quality of politicians. Brent, thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for listening to us on SiriusXM. We'll be back tomorrow. No shortage of news this week, I guarantee you. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. If we have any hope at all in turning this republic back to a republic, it's going to involve you getting out there and getting active. Tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, Thom.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairtom.com is the website, xchairtom.com.